Welcome to the final event of the EUTEx project. We are happy to present to you today what we have achieved for a better reintegration and disengagement of violent extremist and terrorist offenders. In a world grappling with the challenges of extremism and terrorism, the need for successful disengagement and reintegration of offenders has become crucial. Funded by the European Union, we initiated this research project in January 2022 with the aim of preventing further acts of violence. The project focused on developing a European framework for the disengagement and reintegration of extremist and terrorist offenders. Its primary target audience consisted of psychologists and social workers operating in prisons, probation, and NGOs. The first achievement of the project was the development of a unique evidence base. Over several months, we mapped and collected effective approaches for disengagement and reintegration, particularly in the areas of right-wing and Islamist extremism. Building upon the gathered evidence, the project developed comprehensive training modules. The training deals with the topics radicalization, risk assessment, disengagement, reintegration, and the special areas of women, children, and communities. In the future, these training modules will enhance the capabilities of professionals working with extremist offenders in prisons and probation services. During our project, we already trained 25 practitioners from 10 European countries. They participated in intensive training sessions in Vienna, Stockholm, and Tirana. Another significant achievement of the project was the development of a new risk and strength assessment tool. Drawing upon validated items and practical experiences, this tool improves risk assessment and complements it with case management and reintegration assessment. It should not replace but supplement existing assessment methods used by practitioners. With our work, we envision a more secure Europe by focusing on successful reintegration of extremist offenders into society. The project outputs shall help to decrease the incidence of terrorist violence. Together, we can work towards a future where Europe remains safe and free from the threats posed by extremism and terrorism. Our project stands as a testament to our commitment to creating a harmonious and secure society. Thanks for watching.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the EUTEx final event, Breaking the Cycle, Advancing in Disengagement and Reintegration of Terrorist and Extremist Offenders. My name is Dr. Daniela Pisoiu from the OIP. I'm the coordinator of EUTEx, and I'm very honored to host such distinguished audience today. Please allow me to welcome Dr. Alma Zadic, Minister of Justice of the Republic of Austria, and Magister Friedrich Alexander König, Director General of the Prison Service and Preventive Detention, also of the Republic of Austria, as well as representatives of public authorities, in particular prison, probation, ministries of justice, and countering violent extremism centers from Albania, Austria, Bosnia and Herzegovina, France, Germany, Hungary, Kosovo, Romania, Spain, and Sweden, as well as, of course, members of the EUTEx consortium, trainees in our course, and interested stakeholders in person and online. The topic we're discussing today is not one that belongs behind closed doors. Preventing violent extremism and terrorism has become a topic for the whole of society. Our European consortium has worked not on the basis of competition, who is best in Europe, but in the spirit of cooperation and exchange, with a clear understanding that learning from each other, choosing together the best avenues and the best methods is the way to achieve best results. I want to thank our consortium members for their dedication, spirit of collegiality, and ability to work well and hard under pressure. We have achieved a lot, more than we promised, actually, in a very short amount of time. We gather today here to celebrate our achievements, discuss future challenges, and define avenues to further strengthen the work in prison and probation towards the prevention of terrorism and violent extremism, in particular as it concerns recidivism. We will start with the welcome speeches by Dr. Zadic and Magister König, followed by the EUTEx outputs, the short presentation of the course and trainings, and as well as of the EUTEx risk and strength assessment tool. After the coffee break, we have Professor Peter Neumann, who will outline new and future challenges in the areas of terrorism and violent extremism. A panel discussion will address such challenges, particularly for prison and probation, with speakers from European and international umbrella organizations in this field. For the presentation of the outputs, the keynote and the panel discussion, you have the opportunity to ask questions, and I want to encourage you very much to ask questions in the Q&A sessions. We have two moderators, one in person, the lady in white in the back, and one online. So please signal with the raised hand if you want to ask a question anytime. Finally, we will have the lunch at the end, which will also constitute an opportunity for further exchanges and networking. Before we begin, please ensure your mobile devices are switched off or on silent mode. And after finishing this introduction, it is my utmost pleasure to introduce Dr. Alma Sadic, Minister of Justice of the Republic of Austria. Please, the floor is yours. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to the Palais Trautson. As you can see, it's a wonderful palais, and the Austrian Federal Ministry of Justice has the pleasure and the honor to be here since the 1960s. And of course, it's also a great pleasure to host the EUTEx final event today, and I think it's always wonderful to see so many engaged practitioners also from all over the world discussing these very important issues today. The successful social reintegration of offenders is a central objective of modern criminal justice systems because it has great importance not only on the individuals but also on the society as a whole. And how do we successfully promote and achieve reintegration? Well, I think that's one of the most crucial questions that we are facing today and that we are also discussing today. We, of course, need to focus on addressing the individual causes of criminal behavior, addressing the specific risks and supporting offenders to find their place in society. The dedicated work of EUTEx over the last 18 months has made a significant contribution on how disengagement and reintegrations are done best. And this is also why the Austrian Federal Ministry of Justice has welcomed and supported the EUTEx project from the very beginning. What sets EUTEx apart is certainly this broad participation of European practitioners. It also needs to be mentioned that EUTEx has paid attention to sensitive issues of returning foreign terrorist fighters, especially women and their children, as well as the necessary cooperation with local communities receiving returnees, to which EUTEx has dedicated a specific format. As you probably know, we have a special coordination unit for the prevention of extremism and de-radicalization within our Directorate General of the Austrian Ministry of Justice. And this is the coordination unit was involved in the EUTEx, and we have gained a lot of new information and insights from this cooperation, and I want to thank for this collaboration and for the possibilities to exchange information throughout the project. Our experts had the opportunity to discuss the importance of exchange of information between authorities and analyze a variety of methods in the context of individual casework. I'm sure that we all benefit a lot from this transfer, knowledge transfer. It is of a great importance to us in Austria because this is also something that we have to deal with. The availability of educational and entertainment opportunities is important, not only, but especially with extremist and terrorist offenders. These offenders, and this is unfortunate, are often young adults who have been facing exclusion, stigmatization, and a particular lack of perspective in their lives, and who found perspective in very problematic networks. These networks who are specialized in particular for such kind of young adults, who attract them, who give them perspective. And this is the very point when we need to jump in. Good organization of daily life, religious practices. We need to enable religious practices in prison as well. And the respectful climate among inmates and between inmates, and of course between inmates and staff, are therefore incredibly necessary. And therefore I fully agree with EUTEx summary that if there is a trusting social environment, the prison itself can become a place of development and personal transformation. And I'm also convinced that we can support others in their positive development by focusing on their potentials and encouraging them in these areas. This is what I particularly appreciate about the risk assessment tool elaborated by EUTEx, risk and strengths model for rehabilitation. Last but not least, multi-professionalism and cooperation are key for dealing with offenders. Also, if we want to support them in their transition into a life in liberty and help them re-enter their communities. EUTEx project has taken into account this multi-professional networking. Social workers, psychologists, correctional officers, probation officers, and NGO employees have shared their experiences and insights. Exchange of information has been possible online and offline. Correctional facilities and other organizations involved were visited in different countries. People from the field were interviewed and a comprehensive literature research was conducted. All this information will help us to improve our work in the integration of this specific group of offenders. I very much appreciate the work of the organizers and participants and look forward to learning more about the positive outcomes we can achieve with the criminal justice system. Every person that we can help to reintegrate in our society is a victory over extremism and terrorism. Thank you all very much for your very important contributions.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your very inspiring words. And we are very thankful that you took our time to participate in our event. And thank you for your work. And now it's my pleasure to give the floor to our next prominent speaker, Magister Friedrich Alexander König, Director General of the Prison Service and Preventive Detention of the Ministry of Justice here in Austria. The floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor for me to welcome colleagues from neighboring European countries as well as experts from the field of terrorism research and prevention here with us in the Federal Ministry of Justice. I think we can all agree that the fight against terrorism is a global challenge that cannot be met if everyone focuses only on their own goals. Technological progress and international crisis have only exacerbated this problem. We need international solidarity to fight together here in Europe and beyond against those who threaten our democratic values and thus our peace and security. In contrast to general crime, terrorism is fortunately quite rare, but we must not let this fool us because the consequences are devastating. As some of you may know, we had to painfully experience this fact here in Vienna. In a place not far from here, an extremist killed 4 people and seriously injured many more on November 2nd, 2020, before he could be stopped by the police. The terrorist was a former convict who managed to hide his true intentions and deceive the people with whom he worked to reintegrate into society. Today, we know that the combination of many things is responsible for what happened. However, the prison system has managed to learn the necessary lessons from this. One of them is that we must approach this group of offenders with even more professionalism and keep a close eye on conditional releases. As a direct consequence of the attack, the new Counterterrorism Act came into force on January 1st, 2022. The law now allows for closer cooperation with national security authorities. The prison system has a new task in this regard. Whenever an Austrian court has to decide whether a terrorist offender is to be released on parole or not, a case conference must be held. Together with the police, experts from the prison system support the judge in his decision by offering individually tailored risk assessments and risk management strategies. One thing we know for sure is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. To meet this challenge, a specialized department was created in the Federal Ministry. Since the law came into force on January 2022, we have been able to assist the court in more than 60 case conferences. In our work, we rely on nothing less than the highest international standards, work in an evidence-based manner, and constantly develop our methods in exchange with other colleagues at home and abroad. I would like to take this opportunity to address you all and assure you that international cooperation in the field of terrorism is of the utmost importance to us. From both a scientific and practical perspective, it is a field full of challenges and many unknowns. However, given its great relevance, we cannot afford to do less than our best. Thank you very much for your cooperation. Congrats to this really embarrassing and great project, and all the best for your stay here in Vienna. Thank you.
Thank you very much, also for the very concrete insights into what Austrian authorities have undertaken after the terrorist attack that happened here in November 2020. I will now seamlessly switch to our panel discussion that introduces our outputs, in particular the course and the risk assessment tool will follow. I would like to invite my colleagues, Alvaro Vicente and Ioan Dornescu, on stage to already join me for the panel. I will give you a very brief introduction of 5 minutes of the project, what we have done, who we are, and then my two colleagues are going to continue. All right, so yes, we have this very long title, Developing a European Framework for Disengagement and Reintegration of Extremist Offenders and Radicalized Individuals in Prison, including returning foreign terrorist fighters and their families. As we were also talking before with Mr. Koenig, it's of course not just individuals who are convicted for terrorism who can pose issues, but also individuals who are convicted for other offenses, but who are also radicalized. It was important for us to include not just Islamists, but also right-wing extremist offenders, and we are among the first projects, if not the first project, that actually focuses on this very intensively as well. We also have modules specifically for women and children and working with communities in order to face this issue that occurred recently concerning returning individuals from Syria. This is a quick overview of what I'm going to show you. I want to also briefly introduce our consortium. So apart from the Austrian Institute for International Affairs, We have the Ministry of Justice, of course, and in particular the Coordination Unit for Extremism Prevention and De-Radicalization. We have the Real Instituto Elcano from Spain, as well as the Senator of Justice and Constitutional Affairs from Germany, from Bremen, Germany, Neustadt, Probation Service in Austria, Innovative Prison Systems from Portugal, Senor, the science crew, also from Austria, Transform from Sweden, European Strategies Consulting from Romania, Partners Kosovo from Kosovo, the Ministry of Education, Technology and Innovation from Kosovo as well, IDM, Institute for Democracy and Mediation, and University of Paris. I want to thank you all for the great work in 18 months. It was a challenge, but I think we did it. I also want to recognize the contribution of other partners who were not officially part of the consortium, but were involved in the project. So we had in Sweden the active involvement of the Swedish Prison and Probation Service, who allowed us to visit them. We had a very intensive study visit there, also looking into particular methods. The Swedish Center for Preventing Violent Extremism was also involved, even financially, although they were not part of the consortium. So the study visit in Stockholm and the training there was indeed very, very intensive and interesting. We also have the Hungarian Prison Service, who joined us recently, and the Romanian National Administration of Prisons, and we hope to continue our cooperation with them in the future as well. Now, I'm not going to talk much longer. I only have one slide apart from this one. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a gist what is so special about EUTEx, given that, of course, we're not the first project in this area, but I think we're special. So this is why. And this is only a selection. So, our course is really specialized. So far there have been other courses, other trainings, but they were very broad, and for a large number of diverse profiles. We really specialized on particular kinds of practitioners, social workers and psychologists working in prison and probation, and we did our best to actually tailor-make the course to their needs. Our course is also very much evidence-based. So we did a very intensive selection of best practices and selected them based on what works best, either based on scientific evaluation or based on practical experience with these practices. So basically, we also interviewed a number of practitioners, actually 47 in total in all the countries, to see what actually works best in practice. We use state-of-the-art knowledge, state-of-the-art methods. We chose the best experts in this field. You will hear them in a minute. Another feature was also to include this topic of women, children, and communities, which was, as we've heard already, an innovation as compared to other projects and trainings. And we wanted to be very practical. So not too much theory. Of course, the trainees did have some readings to do, but they were very practically oriented. So it was really tailor-made to their practical work. And also during the actual trainings in the offline mode, there were lots of exercises of different kinds. You will hear about it a little bit later. But the idea was for them to actually practice those methods and not just, learn about them in theory. And then finally, I think something that we didn't really plan was for this community of practitioners to emerge. We have a number of trainees here in the room, and thank you so much for coming. And for them, it was really, really an interesting experience. Those trainings were in 3 different locations with the same people, meaning that these people now know each other very well. They did a lot of exchanges, and this community is going to stay. So at least in the WhatsApp group, if not more. And with this, of course, we are not going to stop here. There will be a follow-up. But before that, I want to first of all thank you for the attention you gave me for this brief introduction. And I will continue now with the first speaker, the master of the course, I like to call him, Álvaro Vicente from Elcano. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Daniela. Good morning. It's hard to believe that this final moment has arrived where we share the results of the efforts and work that we have invested over the past year and a half. And I'm particularly excited about presenting the course, the EUTEx course, and taking you over the next minutes through its design, its implementation, and evaluation. I will show you how we created an integral learning experience, and also the feedback that the trainees, the feedback of the trainees regarding the relevancy and the usefulness of the course. Their insights truly highlight the impact that the course had on their professional development. So the main goal of the course was to offer innovative training combining theory and practice to a specific target of prison and probation professionals, particularly psychologists and social workers, working in the rehabilitation and reintegration of extremist offenders and terrorists. By innovative training, we mean that the course aimed to address learning gaps that have been identified in the training offer that is currently available in most European countries. And this added value, this ambition to bridge learning gaps, is particularly evident in the design of the course, where we aimed to combine theory and practice. We firmly believe that combining theoretical knowledge with hands-on practice is crucial to a comprehensive and effective learning experience. And we did so by combining virtual and face-to-face training. The virtual training consisted in a platform and an e-platform where participants could engage with the theoretical contents of the course, which have been generated specifically for this project by experts and practitioners with experience in different topics that I will also present in a minute. The skills, the practical component of the course, were worked in face-to-face seminars that I will also show you. The course was made up of 3 modules. The first module addresses radicalization and risk assessment. More than or beyond covering the basic aspects of motivations involved in radicalization, the module also addresses aspects that have been often overlooked in training, such as, for instance, the relation with mental health and radicalization, also the gender aspects in radicalization. In this module, participants were also familiarized with the risk and strength assessment tool that have been developed in the EUTEx course. The second module addresses techniques that are commonly used in prison and probation for the rehabilitation of inmates. But the focus here was in providing practitioners with the expertise to use these techniques in the context of working with extremist offenders and terrorists. We particularly focus on working alliance, motivational interviewing, and cognitive behavioral therapy. So we explore here the nuances, the challenges, the potential adjustments needed to ensure effective and impactful interventions with this unique population. The third module focuses on work with communities affected by violent extremism, women and minors associated with extremist movements, particularly, as the video mentioned, with jihadism and far-right extremism. The training is planned to last 3 months, so practitioners, trainees, focus on 1 module per month. They first engage with the contents available on the platform, and after that, trainers and trainees meet in different locations in 3 different cities, Vienna, Stockholm, and Tirana, to practice the techniques that have been presented in the virtual component of the course. And in these face-to-face sessions, we combine different active methodologies, for instance, role play, case studies, simulations, discussions. We aim to actively engage participants, trainees in the learning experience by fostering practical action, by encouraging them to collaborate and to identify and experience the challenges that they may face while also putting into practice or transferring these competencies into a daily practice in prison or in probation. So these active methodologies are also aimed at providing or setting the stage for them to exchange ideas and brainstorm solutions to these challenges. We also use participative methodologies. We develop study visits in different settings, in prisons, in NGOs, so that they also meet professionals that are using these methods, and they can also exchange experiences and practices. The course, a pilot course has been already implemented from March to May. This course, as the video mentioned, this course involved 25 participants, mainly psychologists and social workers in prison and probation from 10 different European countries, including Albania, Austria, Bosnia-Herzegovina, France, Germany, Hungary, Kosovo, Romania, Spain, and Sweden. During these 3 months, participants first engage with the contents in this virtual platform. They also tested their knowledge. We had pre and post tests to measure the knowledge increase and also for them to know whether there has been an improvement in their knowledge base. And after that, we met, as I said, we met in different locations to practice these techniques. And to end, I would like to share with you some preliminary results of the evaluation. These insights, their feedback, clearly show that participants experience an improvement in their knowledge regarding the different topics addressed in the course. This was, of course, expected, but we also observed an increase in their self-confidence, in the confidence in their professional performance. This is key because we have identified that professionals dealing with this specific population usually face this kind of uncertainty when, they are not sure whether they are appropriately implementing techniques. So some participants share with us an increase in this self-confidence, but also a greater trust in their penitentiary system. And this is related with their belief that these techniques can be effectively transferred into their daily practice. So to sum up, these preliminary evaluation results show that the course had an impact on the professional practice, on the professional performance of the trainees. It also had an impact on their perception, on their own abilities, and also on their belief of the effectiveness of the techniques that they were trained during the course. So thanks. Yeah.
Thank you very much. since I know you guys so well, I didn't think that maybe the public would like to know who you are, so I'm going to introduce you now after your speech. Álvaro Vicente is analyst in the program on violent radicalization and global terrorism at the Elcano Royal Institute, and he's also a lecturer in political science at the Rey Juan Carlos University. All right, and now I can already introduce my next colleague, Ioan Durnescu, who is a professor in sociology and social work at the University of Bucharest, and also he is the co-chair of the Radicalization Awareness Network Working Group on Rehabilitation, and a very successful trainer and author as well, I might add. Ioan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. Can you take one more presentation before the coffee break? Yeah, I can see you are enthusiastic about that. I'm a little bit worried, to be honest. I have to confess. Usually, when I come to Vienna, I come for the Christmas holiday. I'm a little bit afraid now that my brain will switch into the holiday mode during the presentation. So if I start singing carols, please stop me. It's not what I'm supposed to do. My presentation will be very short, I hope, trying to give you some kind of a glimpse into what we did in Module 2 of the training. The presentation structure is quite straightforward. We're going to have a short overview of de-radicalization or PCV work, and then we will discuss a little bit about the soft measures, and then we will discuss about the training content that we delivered in different locations, as Álvaro said. So as we all know, the main strategies for PCV work can be classified in many ways, and we are very happy that we have Paul here who will definitely develop this further. But the most straightforward classification is one based on hard measures and soft measures. You know, hard measures are those taken by the law enforcement agencies regarding intelligence, information sharing, strengthening the border security, and so on. The soft measures, on the other hand, are more focusing on prevention and de-radicalization or disengagement or social reintegration aims, supporting conflict resolution and addressing the root causes of radicalization, like grievances and human rights abuses and so on, enhancing communities and promoting resilience, countering radicalization and extremist ideologies, but also de-radicalization, disengagement, and social reintegration of violent extremist offenders, or DDR interventions, as we like to call them in our training. Now, I know that there is a kind of global debate about de-radicalization or disengagement or social reintegration. But what we learned from the latest systematic reviews is that actually in practice that this distinction is not very clear-cut, is not so relevant. Of course, it is relevant when it comes to planning, design, evaluation, and so on. But when it comes to practice, a lot of interventions really integrate all these elements at once. We have quite a lot of interventions nowadays around the globe. Some of them are located in Europe. Some of them are single-issued or single-topic focused, like DIRAD in Austria, for example, focusing on narrative work, ideology work. And then we have comprehensive programs like PAIRS or Entrée or other projects like that that are covering a lot of components of what de-radicalization and disengagement means. And then we have individual trajectories in particular in Belgium, where actually interventions are built as they develop, as they work with individuals. So they are not predetermined kind of set of activities. Of course, literature is quite replete with suggestions about how this intervention should be organized, delivered, designed, and so on. What are the ingredients, preconditions? But what we know that it's really crucial for all these kind of interventions to look at least 3 topics, which are establishing the working alliance, establishing or developing trust, motivating participants to change, and also cognitive behavioral interventions that really help people challenge their own kind of thinking or mindset. Now, talking a little bit about the working alliance and how important the working alliance is, I would like to invite you to do something practical. So please take your telephone and go to menti.com and introduce that code, that number, or you just scan this QR code that will take you straight to the website where you are invited to answer to this question. How would you feel if you are asked to do something against your will? And you have 3 entries you can enter. Okay? Can you do that? Okay. Did you manage to do it? Is it working? It's working. Excellent. So, how would you feel if somebody would ask you to do something that you don't want to do? For example, if somebody would ask you to come to this conference against your will, how would you feel? 3 entries. Do you want to see your own answers? Do you? Okay. Ooh. Angry. That's quite tough. Unhappy, angry, uneasy, confrontational, upset, unsafe. Why? Why me? Huh? Okay. Do we have more? I think I've seen more than 5 participants in the room. Okay. Pressured. Exactly. Yep. Okay. Excellent. So as you see, most of the feelings are not very pleasant. This is exactly what happens with our clients. Most of them, even if they are in prison, in probation, in the community, when they are subject to different interventions, most often they are quite resistant, hostile. Some of them are anti-system, anti-establishment. Some of them are they even have, oh, okay, we still have more. Oh my God. Very good. Okay, I think it's enough. We can move on. Now I'm overwhelmed. Okay. So exactly like that, this is the feeling of our clients when we meet them. So that's why we need to have special skills and competences to engage with them to start with, and then to start developing some kind of interventions that would help them change their lives for better. So most of them are resistant, hostile, as I said, anti-system. Some of them even come with different mental health issues like paranoia, bipolar, post-traumatic stress disorder, especially if we are talking about the foreign fighters. So it's really, really, really difficult to relate with them. I interviewed once a psychologist working in a Swedish prison in this field, and he told me that sometimes he needs 20, 30 sessions before, only to work on the working alliance before he's able to move on to the next stage of planning or intervention or whatever. So 20, 30 sessions only to establish the working alliance. This is really, really an important work. And that's why we allocated a full module for this topic to help, first of all, to help professionals to understand the position of the client, to understand the dynamic, and not to take personally these kind of reactions that they see every day. And then, of course, we train them in different skills, like how to reduce reactance, how to do the role clarification, empathy, how to use optimism and hope, how to use humor, why not, and so on. So we work very hard in developing this skill because we are aware that this is one of the most important ones for our frontline practitioners. Then we move on to the next module dedicated to motivational interviewing. You see that motivation is very fluid most of the time. It's very dynamic. Even for us, today we might feel very motivated to do something. Tomorrow we might not feel so motivated to do that, and so on and so on. So there is a continuum. Most of our clients, unfortunately, when we meet them for the first time, they are somewhere on the left. Quite not motivated or are motivated to participate. They don't trust, they don't want to get involved, and so on. So we have to do our best to develop this, to challenge this kind of lack of motivation. So that's why motivation interviewing as a technique is a very important one, and therefore we work with our frontline practitioners to develop these skills of how to amplify discrepancies, how to roll with the resistance, how to support self-efficacy, how to use the change talk in our daily practice, and so on. And then, of course, we continue to the cognitive behavioral interventions, because relationship skills and motivational interviewing, although they are very, very important, they cannot really, contribute to changing people or helping people to understand how to change. If we don't do anything else and we stop here only with relationship skills and motivation interviewing, we will only have very motivated offenders. And this is not our aim. Our aim is to help them design a kind of new mindset, to challenge their ideologies, and to see that world can be seen with different glasses as well. So we employ these cognitive behavioral interventions and also other narrative methodologies, and I'm very happy to see Spiros here, who shared with us the biographical work that Austria is using in this field, and we really appreciated this intervention. Coming back to the CBT strategies, we discussed with our participants about the use of internal dialogue, the self-talk, the cognitive errors and distortions, taking perspective of others, and so on, trying to help our clients to deal with these deficits in order to strengthen the cognitive power and to in a pro-social direction. And just to share with you some of the most frequently met in practice discrepancy or errors, cognitive errors. You see the black and white thinking, it's the so-called my way or highway, the wrong, good or wrong, chosen or traitor, Muslim, non-Muslim, or infidel or kufr, and so on. Another very frequently met cognitive error or distortion is dehumanization. We hear a lot of many times in the narrative of our clients words like dirty animals, unholy, mindless sheep, and so on. Of course, we have a full list of cognitive errors that we need to look at that are quite important with working with offenders in general, but with our group in particular, like dichotomous thinking, personalization, selective abstraction, overgeneralization, emotional reasoning, catastrophizing, confirmation bias, minimizing the harm, and so on. And how we did it? Actually, we did it combining different kind of approaches, as Alvaro already described, so I will not go into many details. We used the e-learning platform, so people had the chance to read first the whole material, and then we did presentations like this one, trying to explain the theory behind these skills. And then we did role plays, trying to develop not only the understanding, but also the skills and the competencies in the context. We also used debates, sharing experiences, learning from each other, and of course we took this train-the-trainer approach, which we think is really, really important in order for us to be able to cascade this learning into our own jurisdictions. So this is what we did, and this is how we did it. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I made you curious to check the whole program. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much for these presentations of the course and the training. Of course, they're only snippets, so we didn't want to put a whole load of 2 hours presentation summaries of what we've done, but just to give you a gist of the course. Now, I would like to open for a few minutes of questions. If there's anything you'd like to know from the public, we already have one question online. I'm receiving the questions here on my phone, so I'm not checking messages or emails. I'm checking to see if there's questions from the audience online. And one was, what about the NGOs and the practitioners who work with them on a daily basis in prison? I think I can say something about this. Maybe you guys want to also chip in. In principle, our course is designed also for this target group. So we included them as well. They weren't as numerous as the practitioners working in prison and probation, but in principle, these methods can as easily be applied by exit workers. I guess we call them exit workers in NGOs. And it's also different from country to country whether or not NGOs are actually allowed to work in prison. So in some countries, prisons rely very much on NGOs. In others, they don't. However, in both cases, you will have social workers, you will have psychologists in prison, nevertheless, who will work with these individuals. So also in those cases, it would be important to train them as well. Now, I don't know if there's anyone at this point. If not, I know there's a lot of to digest. But maybe for you guys, if you look back now on the experience, is there any memorable moment that you can share with us in terms of the trainings or something maybe that the trainees told you at some point?
Well, for me, I think that the most exciting moment was when we did the training in person, and we put together so many experiences from different jurisdictions, from different institutional perspectives, as you say, from NGOs, from prisons, from probation, from exit workers, social workers, psychologists. So this kind of melting pot of perspectives really gave us new insights and new understanding of how we can work in this field. So we learn a lot from each other. It was not only about us training the participants, but participants training us equally. So it was literally, it was like that. It was really, really important and interesting for us. So that was my moment, my aha moment.
And I will highlight the moments when participants are actually having the opportunity or taking advantage of this opportunity to share the challenges that they have faced in their professional practice, and they can learn from the experiences of other participants, or particularly, of course, from the trainers. And this, for instance, I have seen this in some of these face-to-face seminars where they dealt, for instance, with how to deal with ideology in an intervention. This is something that many practitioners feel insecure about. We actually noticed this preparing for the course, while in the stage of the design of the course. This was one of the main insights that emerged in the interviews and in the living lab that we conducted. So seeing that actually participants could share their experiences with regards to dealing with ideology and how other professionals are actually addressing it. To me, that clearly shows that the course is making an impact and is not only improving their knowledge, is actually giving them clues that they can effectively transfer into their daily practice in an easy way. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi. Leanne Tagworker, UN Office of Drugs and Crime. I would love to know if there is a plan, or if you already said it, I'm sorry, for proactive trainings in the future.
What we also did as part of the project was to get feedback from the participants, to basically have last adjustments to the course and the training, and definitely we plan to continue. I cannot tell you now in what shape or form, but we definitely feel that we have a product that more people should benefit from. And we had the chance to have people from many countries, so we can say for sure that it's not just specific for one country, but it really is applicable to probably the whole of Europe and maybe even beyond, I don't know. But yes, we definitely plan to continue.
Great, thanks.
Hey, thank you both of you for the presentation, kind colleagues and friends, for the presentation of our course. Pedro Liberado from IPS, Innovative Prison Systems, by the way. Just here a question, something very innovative in our course is the inclusion of Module 3, because there are a lot of trainings in this field, know them quite a lot, but this specificity has not been encompassed so far by the majority of them. So especially, what are the not only on the e-learning scope, but also on the last training in Tirana, what were the major benefits that practitioners saw on also being attentive to these issues, now working with women and children as well?
So maybe I can say something, or do you want to say something first, or yeah? Because I was in Tirana, so. Indeed, first of all, the work with women tends to be more difficult in some cases than with men. So that was really a surprise. In principle, of course, many of the experiences are the same, but with women, you tend to have more trauma or more types of trauma. And also, it might be necessary to work in slightly different ways. In fact, the working alliance can take a long time, for example. Yeah. To establish. I mean, I think you guys can say something more, I think, on this gender aspect as well. So it was a mix of, same methods, but adapted, and also we had specific methods as well. We had a specialist, and I also want to officially and formally mention them, Grenzgänger and EUTEx. They are an organization in Germany who specialize on the work with women and children. So we had somebody from there who did this training on women and children with really insights and experiences from real cases. And there were certain, special exercises on this as well. Yeah. It was we have material on this. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, first of all, the consortium members are allowed to ask questions. Okay. So clarifying that, we can move on. I think the training was innovative in many ways, and I think the most important thing was that we managed to integrate the most up-to-date research into the content of the training. Also, what we learned about the importance of gender, also about sustainability, also about human rights. We also integrated the time dimension into our kind of presentations. So all sorts of things were quite new. Going back to the gender dimension, we know that the interest in the gender dimension resurrected, let's say, in the last, 5 years in research. And we managed to take that on board. We are keen to learn more. We know that there is some research going on in France, for example, on this dimension, and we are looking forward to integrate that after it will be finished. The good thing is that the platform is based on, it's online, it's e-learning, so we can easily update it when we have a demand in this direction. So. But I think it would be interesting to ask the participants themselves to see what they think about it, if we have any brave volunteer.
Well, I don't know if you want to put the spotlight on them at this point. But if there's any more questions in the public, yes, please go ahead.
Svetlana Zamboni, Bosnia and Herzegovina Social Center, Maglaj, also one of the trainees in the program. I had a question what follows, but that was also your question as well, and I partially got the answer. But basically, I wanted to talk about the material used during the training, as you mentioned, the online sessions and the face-to-face sessions. And I wanted to ask EUTEx if you are planning to make a kind of publication gathering all the materials used during the training, which is extremely useful for the practitioners, but also to make online material available for the practitioners. So I would recommend that as one of the practitioners and a member of the EUTEx team in training. And I think that would be it would speed up things, I think, in the field when it comes to the practitioners. So any plans for availability of everything that we use?
So for the trainees, there will definitely going to be a, not printed, but a digital PDF version, because the platform basically guides you through kinds of presentations. So there will also be a text version of it, and there will also be, there's going to be a handbook as well on it. Now, Pedro, do you want to, as the one in charge of the platform?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. In fact, that's a question that many people pose in many projects, like what happens after this? Like, will this be available? Will this one-time thing? Well, in fact, we need to respect some stuff, right, regarding European projects. Like, this is part of something that will be submitted, and after the approval of the Commission, being a public deliverable, we can share these materials. Of course, that all the online-based platform will be transferred into a printed version for those who would like to, like in some kind of a training manual. Notwithstanding, the platform will still be made available to a predefined amount of people that wants to join periodically. In case, of course, depending on after the approval of the Commission, etc., and so on and so forth. Before that, we cannot simply, as this is still a piloting stage of the course, we are now fine-tuning it. We cannot just open it to the wider public before the Commission says, yeah, you're good to go.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I think there was a question there.
Mr. Dornescu, I think you said that psychologists sometimes need 30 to 40 sessions to build some kind of relationship with the inmates. How many times does it happen that they just fail to do so because the extremists are just stuck in the world? Is this a rare phenomenon?
Well, it is definitely a possibility. I'm not aware of any research on how many relationships like this failed. But definitely it happens in practice. But I think it would be a very good research question for practitioners. I think they would like to know this, to what extent this happens in practice and what can be done in order to deal with this more effectively. But I heard many times practitioners saying that we could do nothing. We could not relate, even if we changed the professional working with that particular person, changing strategies. Sometimes it happens. I mean, we have to be humble and to recognize that we are not, gods to do, everything. Thank you.
Sometimes it's really surprising things that happen. So, for example, one would assume that men can communicate better with men, like say Islamist men, right? But from practice, it's oftentimes exactly the opposite, that men rather open up to women. What you wouldn't think, because Islamist, he's not going to talk to a woman. Yeah? That's one point. Another point is you have to keep on trying. So somebody said at some point, I just go there every day. And after a while, he's going to open up. Also because in the prison context, there's not so much possibility of conversation, right? So basically, the idea is, the recipe is not to give up, right? Because in the end, one is dealing with human beings. So there will be an opening at some point. You just need to know. In some cases, it might be over hobbies, or it can be things that of everyday life. But at some point, one needs to be creative as well, I guess. Okay, I have actually also a question for you guys individually. The most difficult is for you, so I let you relax.
We had an agreement.
But Alvaro, so you're also, of course, a researcher and you've interviewed many jihadists in prison. And I want to ask you about something which is also relevant here in Austria, relating to social networks. So I know you've done research on this particular aspect, and here there was a whole debate to which extent the attacker was, alone or was in a group, and what kind of responsibility these other people have. So if you could just share with us in a couple of minutes, social networks, what is their relevance, especially for jihadi terrorists?
And in particularly when it comes to the rehabilitation and reintegration, the work...
No, radicalization, first of all. I mean...
Yeah, so it's true that this is one of the key factors in the process of radicalization, because usually radicalization is a collective... It's a process that usually takes place in a relational environment. I mean, individuals, even when they become involved alone in an attack, their process of radicalization usually unfolds in interaction with other individuals who might not be necessarily also willing to engage, but the process of adopting the radical set of beliefs that leads them to commit violence usually develops in these interactions with other people, and yeah, it's true that we have noticed, we have observed these in the research that we conducted in prison, in Spain particularly, that these relational environments are crucial in the process, but also we notice that jihadists are usually also connected to people who are against violence, who are against their willingness to commit violence, for instance, to travel to a conflict area, and these countervailing ties, these opposing social influences, are key not only to prevent the process, but also to ensure reintegration once individuals are released from prison. Mm-hmm. It is true that there are different elements, not only having a connection with an individual who acts as a radicalizing agent, but also being connected to other peers who support violence, who might operate online. This is also generally an important aspect of the process leading or driving them to radicalization. And that's why also in the EUTEx course, in some of the modules of the course, we emphasize the relevancy of working on the aspects that might make individuals more vulnerable to the influence or to the pressure to conform with these environments that are supportive of jihad, and also how to deal with negative reactions, for instance, attempts to confront with discrepancy or with disagreement, which might actually reinforce the process of radicalization. Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, here goes. So sometimes you read in the press, or one reads in the press, de-radicalization doesn't work. What would you say to that?
Wow, that's a difficult one indeed.
See, I told you.
Yeah, it's. You see, this is a big problem for us, not only in practical terms, but also in terms of science or research. Mm-hmm. We still don't know what success means. We don't have an agreement on that. We don't know what does it mean to be de-radicalized. How do you measure that? Mm-hmm. What are the indicators? So we still have a lot of questions, even though this field, it's quite an old one. Of course, in the last maybe 20 years, it becomes more and more visible and important, but still, we still have a lot of questions to answer. A few weeks ago, I was in Strasbourg talking about the definition for terrorism. We still don't have an agreed definition on terrorism at the Council of Europe level, at least. So we still have basic questions to answer from the conceptual perspective, and then be able to go to the public and explain what is achievable, what is not achievable, in what context, and so on. So I think we still have to do a lot of work in this direction. However, we can go back to the public and say that usually the recidivism in this group of people is quite low. It's somewhere between 2 and 5%, which is quite low. But still, even with a very low recidivism rate, the risk, the damage can be huge. So the public is quite sensitive to these issues. So I think one answer to your question would be to educate the public and to explain what we are doing and how the public can contribute to support this intervention, these initiatives, and then hope that we can develop even more and develop the knowledge and the conceptual frameworks in order to become more and more effective. But I guess we're going to learn about this more with Paul.
Yeah, and also something that is, I guess, easier to grasp is disengagement, right? So also in our project, we very much focused on this idea of disengagement, so basically stopping behavior, and not so much. Of course, you have to work with the cognitive level as well. It's inevitable. But there's also the question of, is it useful? Is it necessary to de-radicalize in the sense of changing the mindset completely? Is it even possible? Or is it, should our task be to affect behavior?
Or even, is it even ethical to do something like that? There are questions, legitimate questions like that as well. Is it ethical to aim for de-radicalization?
And this is, of course, even more relevant in complicated times like this, where you have attackers who are not necessarily so much radicalized, so who might even have psychological problems, who might have only just read something online for a very short while and then already done something. So these are not necessarily people who are radicalized in the classic sense. They're not indoctrinated, but still they can do damage, a lot of damage, actually. All right, on this grim note, but still, thank you very much, you two, for giving us insights into the course and training. Round of applause.
Thank you.
And and I would also like to invite our colleague Pedro, whom you already heard on the stage, to have a shorter presentation, so don't worry, coffee break is coming very, very soon.
Yeah, Johan was mentioning that the coffee break was already after,
yeah,
yours, but no, you still have one, then okay.
It was a strategy, So I'm just going to say a few words about you.
Yeah, for sure.
I know you're very well known. You've coordinated many European projects already. So Pedro Liberado is Chief Research Officer at the Innovative Prison Systems in the area of radicalization, violent extremism, and organized crime portfolio. He is a certified trainer, active member of the European Commission's Radicalization Awareness Network, ran policy support and practitioners, as well as full member of the International Corrections and Prison Association, and many other associations in the area. And with this, the floor is yours. We're going to hear something about our new updated tool.
Thank you very much, Danielle. Thank you very much for your introduction. And to be honest, words cannot express the gratitude to be here today with all of you, especially since we are in the last month of our 18-month project. So it has been a long way with a series of partners to delve into the detail of what we have developed on the training, now on the radicalization, and strength assessment tool. Yeah. It's not on? It is? Yes. Oh, no, it isn't. But I speak loud enough,
Yeah, I didn't notice.
I didn't see no one. Hey, man, we have microphone. Okay. Thank you very much. And of course, to thank all the conference organizers, our Austrian colleagues on the Austrian Institute for International Affairs, CENAR, the Austrian Ministry of Justice, also with Neustart involved in this project, and the whole consortium for the great discussions that we had in the past months. And of course, highlight that it's none of what you have seen here with someone presenting, it's an individual work, it's a team effort that led us to present what we have here today, and hopefully what we'll have in the upcoming years as well, to guarantee the sustainability of our approach. Of course, as I do understand that we have practitioners coming with different backgrounds, with different kinds of understanding, just here pinpointing some of the, very briefly, some overview how risk assessment tools can be used in the area of preventing and countering violent extremism. Of course, we all know, and this was emphasized in our e-learning course, the usefulness to be used in sentence planning, in case management, risk management, but on very securitized. Sometimes many of these instruments tend to have this security perspective much more exacerbated in comparison to a communitarian one. That's why we focus on risk assessment is essential to guide interventions plans, focusing on inmate rehabilitation and reintegration to society. Of course, also with the inclusion of NGOs in our training to guarantee something that is very important, or not guarantee, should I say, but to increase the probability also after rehabilitation and reintegration, something that is also quite neglected, that is stabilization in society, stabilization in the long term. And of course, this requires a lot of cooperation with external partners, different kinds of actors involved in the fields, and it's a procedure that should be done as periodical as possible. Without further ado, let's move into the details of the risk and strength assessment tool, as we do lack some time, of course, to talk about everything. But it's an individual assessment that aims to make some kind of a twofold assessment approach. Of course, to evaluate individuals' risk of radicalization, but how can strengths, so-called protective factors, we intend to go beyond this restrictive list of 10, 8, 11 that the majority of instruments have, and gather, not only in literature, but also according to practitioners' perspective, other strengths that can be used to potentialize tailor-made development of rehabilitation plans and hence decrease the risk that some individuals might pose. And we do consider contextual factors, both at the micro and meso level. At the micro level, of course, those that are related with individual per se, such as the individual criminal history, but also any social or psychological factors. But at the meso level, so kind of more related with this social environment, his network, his peer group, his family, and how that can eventually potentialize the radicalization process. And of course, also dimensions also vary according to the typology, so both static dimensions, those that cannot be changed. No matter what I can do during the rehabilitation procedures, I cannot alter what is in the past, I cannot alter this individual's criminal history, his or her or their exposure to violence in the past. I can though alter how he deals with that. And these are the changeable factors that can contribute to the individual radicalization, to individual rehabilitation. So, and I will talk about a bit more in detail about this in the upcoming slides. So we have conceived this based on items from different risk assessment instruments. We collected 20-something risk assessment instruments, then the ones that are applied in prison, probation, and with individuals facing terror-related crimes, and also those who are validated by literature, such as the VIR2R, the RG22+, and RAPS-IRS, which is currently being evaluated, even though it's one best practice for RUN, were the three selected. But these items were then analyzed, structured, and selected, of course, to the validation in the literature in the current times, because many of these items were validated and the literature be done in the past, in 2015, and so on and so forth. the practitioner's practical ability. So we asked practitioners, some are here in the room, okay, these are the items of the different risk assessment tools, without knowing where these items come from. Do you think this is useful or not? Do you change the phrasing, how the risk items are currently structured? How can this be more tailored for you to better understand what is asked during these procedures? Of course, as we were using different tools, there was some overlap of items. We took them out. We rephrased to comply with gender neutral or inclusive criteria because we know many of these risk assessment instruments were done to male offenders. Always, all the time, he's. So we completely took away those kind of that kind of phrasing. Also, in this discussion from practitioners within the consortium, the inclusion of rehabilitation challenges to comply also with practitioners said during the interviews that we've made, and of course fine-tuning the whole instrument, often an exercise that we've done in Vienna 3 months ago that led us especially to restructure the whole format on how the tool is, and how the procedural effect of the tool should be made. We intend to follow an SPJ-based approach, so structured professional judgment. We tend to guide the practitioner doing the assessment, but the final judgment, it's up to the assessor himself or herself themselves. Of course, they are intended to make a two-fold assessment. To which extent the micro and meso risk items that I've mentioned can't contribute to individual radicalization, but then, independently of the risk score, what are the strengths in the individual? And how these can influence each risk item and to which extent. So the predicted full or partial impact in risk reduction. Who should use this tool? Very briefly, only trained and certified professionals, otherwise this can pose several programs. And we've mentioned also our focus of our approach, psychologists, social workers, probation officers, so going a bit beyond the psychologist spectrum on the use of these tools that have previous experience with forensic populations. And the target group, of course, those who are facing or have faced terrorism or violent extremist-related sentences and might be accompanied by any of these actors that you see here in the screen. Going a bit into detail of the dimensions and the items, not detailing, of course, all of the stuff. We do have 43 risk items. We narrow it down the best that we can, also according to different literature, many back and forth between ourselves and the core group developing this. But at least in when it comes to dimensions, we have 7. 1 static, the history and capability of the individual with 6 risk items. For instance, not only the criminal history, but if he or she or they have been exposed to violence or trauma in the past, or to any social abuse or pressure to behave in a coerced way. This here an item clearly, for instance, related with a gender perspective. That happens many times also in the Islamist extremism scope. And 6. Dynamic risk factors, dimensions, sorry. And you can see from the motivation that can be like if the individual has the need to belong, the need for financial status, for social status, that makes him engage in an extremist group, social psychological environment, the presence or not of any kind of mental illnesses, for instance, indoctrination and worldview, when he or she or they start rejecting democratic society values. Then at the meso level, of course, the networks and the power of networks, defended by many scholars, for instance in the 3N also model, here the influence of the family, of their peer group that are connected or not to extremists, and also, for instance, if he fears some kind of a rehabilitation challenge, if he fears community retaliation once he leaves prison. This is also very, very important to grasp. In group identification and perceived superiority, we are now already start to conceive my group as being superior to others, to minorities, for instance, and then the intention to act at more behavioral scope, where I already or consume any kind of extremist materials, or even produce them, and have clearly defined targets of my perceived enemies. But we also have strengths. 23 strengths. We came up with a lot of strengths at the beginning, then we narrowed them down. Just here, some examples, just pinpointing here, the presence or not of friends outside of the relative group, and that support rehabilitation, the engagement in rehabilitation programs, that he has some kind of other sources of identity. Once again, the need to belong that can be perceived both as a risk factor or as a protective one, as an individual strength. And for instance, an individual that can have as a risk factor the presence of any mental illnesses or mental health issues, but if he, she, or they are willing to take on medication, this is already intends to change. This is already a positive strength that can be assessed. And one thing that was, I believe, in one of your slides was that we are very practical. So in many presentations that I tend to see about risk assessment, everything is up in the air, how this works, how this is not. So here, just a brief perspective on how we intend also to insert the data in the tool and how to interpret the whole data coming from it. Just another mention. We start, of course, with low risk, moderate risk, high risk. But what does this tell to the practitioner? So we changed our phrasing to, okay, keep attentive to monitor and act. If it's high risk, we need to act. How to act? And that's up to here, just I'll just read, for instance, keep attentive. Practitioners should periodically check if risks tend to increase or not, but there's also a description of the type of individuals, general description, of course, that intends to just serve as a model for the practitioners doing the assessment. If it's in the yellow phase, like in the monitor, I should practitioners to start devising strategies for a possible intervention, and upcoming assessments should be periodically scheduled, and also to think about which trends can be used in the case of rehabilitation if this individual will be integrated in this kind of intervention in the future. And of course, the act, if it's an high-risk individual, an action plan, if not in place, must be drawn as soon as possible, and this can be done. This can be related to new inmate placement, transfer, rehabilitation interventions that can be in place, because of course it can pose a risk not only to the community. If this individual intends to leave prison, but also to the whole prison population and on radicalized or re-radicalize other individuals. Practitioners, of course, we offer an assessment per dimension. So practitioners, the whole risk items pops out in dimensions that we talked about in the past, besides presenting just a whole global risk level. So this gives the assessor the ability to understand if are the static dimensions, the ones that we cannot change, that are very exacerbated in the individual, or the dynamic dimensions, and therefore this individual is more prone to be intervened and change his ideological or his behavioral perspective when it comes to violent extremism. And here you can see, just as an example, you can see here before the risk score, before selecting which trends can influence the overall risk score, and you can see it's much more green if the individual has more strengths that can diminish the risks. For the purposes of the presentation, we have inserted here the numerical values, but this will not be part of the assessment. We only use colors, and it's a bit more yellowish here than it's here on the screen. It's, for this one, it's clearly red, the one in motivation. And also how to use the tool. This is just some screenshots, but it's a 4-step process. The first, to define the way that, this is just a screenshot, define the way that each risk item present to the individual. So before stating that if this risk item is present or not, what is the weight that I conceive to this risk item? So they don't have the similar weighting because, you know, what might be important for a certain individual might not be important to other. And this is clearly exacerbating the SPJ-centered perspective of our tool, asking the assessor if he thinks or not is important to this specific individual under assessment. And if you think after that, if the present of the risk item in individual from never to always, of course, there is now, so that I do not have this information, so that should be avoided, checked for the data before doing the assessment, and the form automatically calculates the final risk item and pops out in the screen. All answers might be duly justified by the practitioners all the time. Why he or she or they have choose this particular score, but for say, let's say that for instance, he considers or she considers the risk to be very important, so it pops out as 1, to be frequently in the individual, like feels their lives are worthless, as you can see here, one of the risk items, and it automatically pops up at 3. So let's see in the next ones. For the strength, assessing the strengths, the same procedure, like defining the weight of each strength item, and then to which extent it's present individual or not. And after, of course, duly justifying their answer, if I say that this is moderately important, acknowledges having some good qualities or some positive achievements in the past, and I say, okay, this is moderately important, it's quite rare in this individual, strength item points as 1. Here, the color code is invertedly, so the red if the strength is less. And then the interplay between the risks and the strengths. So automatically, everything pops out regarding the risk items that I have assessed. I can opt to choose if I want to view all risk items or just the ones that were scored higher, or I can just choose any of the dimensions or cherry pick for individualized view. And then which strengths out of the 23, I can select as much as I want to, can influence each risk item and to which extent, like the predicted total or partial impact in risk reduction. And of course, form at the end calculates. So let's say that, for instance, remember that this was a 3 at the beginning, the same risk item that we have seen in the previous slides. For the purposes of this presentation, I'll just select one strand, which is the one that we have scored, knowledge is having some good qualities or some positive achievement in the past. Automatically the sheet pops out the 1. So, and if I say that the strength impacts risk reductions is 0.5, it then does the calculation. It's 2.5, the overall risk the risk score after the influence of the strengths. But then the overall decision as SPJ, I might not accept the score presented by the risk assessment tool. So this also comes from the feedback from the consortium practitioners and practitioners that were part in our training program. Do I accept the score that the assessment gave me or not? And then if I say yes, automatically pops out as the final risk score, but I should, of course, justify the reasons. Why do I accept it? If I say no, I am obliged to say, okay, so which do you intend to be the critical risk score or the real risk score for this individual? And if I select 4, it pops out as the 4, and I need to justify the answer. So putting the whole judgment into the practitioner, the weight of the items, the presence of the item, and if I accept or not what the risk assessment as the score of the risk assessment. And then everything pops out in a final overview score table. You can see here the risk factor that only has that cannot be changed, only has 1 score at the beginning. And the other ones, you can see here just by dimension, and for the purpose of presentation, as I've mentioned, with the risk numerical value. This was before, for instance here, before the influence of the strengths, after the influence of the strengths, and the final decision of the practitioner. This can be, please just look at the colors if it's influenced or not, and then pops out the whole overall risk level according to the final decision of the practitioner. That, of course, focus, the color should be the ones that are much more important here. And this is a bit more greener here, the 2.1 in the screen as well. But it's much more. This is what came up during this whole task, exacerbating once again the judgment perspective of the practitioner. But as the final slide, there's a lot to be done still, because we need to test, of course, regarding reliability and validation. There's a lot more to be done. We need to pilot this tool in an increased sample of trained practitioners to ensure its reliability, and also with increased sample of case studies. This is something for us all that we need, of course, as researchers, and also to increase the reliability and validity of our approach, which could not be done. Let's not forget it was an 18-month project. We have been presenting here just the course. We have not presented what it's before the course, and also the risk assessment. This is the whole project, 18 months. The risk assessment tool per se had about 10 to 12 months, if I'm not mistaken. So we need to ensure, and this has already been also asked for some of you here, definitely agree. We need to, not only regarding the training, to ensure how can we guarantee the outreach of our approach to other jurisdictions, but also in regards to the risk assessment tool to continue to strengthen this approach, as we had some jurisdictions already interested in our framework. And that's it. Thanks a lot, and it's a pleasure to be here, and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Perhaps also as a background, I guess, this further development of the tool was not planned, but it really came from the field where people said, we have all these risk assessment tools, but what do we do afterwards? So we know, okay, there is a certain degree of risk, but how do we apply this now in our work in terms of disengagement, reintegration, in the case management? So that's why, and that's how this additional part emerge of strengths.
Yeah, exactly. We how the tool was conceived at the beginning, then at the midterm, and now at the end, how it is now. In fact, this need to exacerbate, and as I spoke in the beginning, of course, we are dealing with a security issue. Let's not forget about that. But the phrasing of some items, they are completely biased. Like, it's very, very securitized perspective that doesn't give many room to be used in rehabilitation, for instance, or whatsoever. And this is in fact in line with what we have also published some years ago in the JFT journal on a different study that we've made, that most of the rehabilitation programs do not even include risk and needs assessment instruments. About 60% of the ones of the 22 of our sample, because they simply do not agree with the securitized perspective. For some of the developers and the implementers of these rehabilitation programs, of this risk assessment instruments, they are not prepared to be included at a later stage, and that's why we intend. That's what we intend to do, and that's also we intend to provide training to a broad range of actors, from prison probation and NGOs that might be dealing with these individuals in prison probation and the community, to guarantee the continuous procedures of efforts towards stabilization, as I've mentioned. Yeah.
I think you mentioned before the area of gender. I don't know if you can say something about gender in our tool.
Yeah. In fact, regarding gender, and this is gender is not only the inclusion of items, is adapting the whole phrasing, not to be tailored to men, but also not to be tailored to women. For instance, that risk item that we've mentioned in the past, that the literature does says that might be forced to act in a coerced way, being victim of some kind of social pressure, to act in the way that the society expects
her to act, but we did not simply say that that item is specific. If it's a woman, please fill in this item. No, if you think that it's appropriate to this individual, please fill in this item and say why. Of course, that in the user manual and guidelines, we are in the description of the different risk items. We do provide this explanation, and of course, the correspondent literature reference where this comes from, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I guess that connects also to the question, which is very practical. If one wants to use the tool, what does one have to do? I mean, is it necessary to do a training on it, or how does it work?
Of course it is. Of course it is, and the training and the fine-tune. This is what we got to. It's a continuous process, and it's this task together with one in the training are being done simultaneously, as you know. So both we are gathering at the same time the practitioners' feedback on how can we improve our training, but of course the training also needs to be fine-tuned according to the last version of the tool or any other product being developed. We have discussed this also in the previous weeks. It needs to be mandatory for practitioners to have a clear understanding of the tool. So the training that on the specific use of this risk assessment instrument will be exacerbated in comparison to the one that was done during these pilot test events. Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess it was a lot to digest, a lot to take in. I think everybody needs coffee now. I'm sure there's a lot of interest in this tool, and I think you will be approached by people regarding this. So I encourage you to use the coffee break also for networking, for asking questions.
Hope so.
Mingle. We have about a little bit over 20 minutes.
Of course, yeah.
For the coffee, and thank you so much for your attention so far, and see you after the break.
Thank you. Coffee time. Let's go.
All right, welcome back to our discussion, all fresh and caffeinated. It is my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, who actually needs no introduction, of course, but I will nevertheless say a few words. Professor Peter Neumann is Professor of Security Studies at the King's College London. He's the founder of the International Center for the Study of Radicalization, one of the very early centers looking into this particular area. He also served as the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, so OSCE Special Representative on countering violent extremism, and he's leading the academic advisory group of the Radicalization Awareness Network Policy Support. He has written a lot in very highly ranked journals, also in the press. I will only mention a few books. To the topic here, Radicalized New Jihadists and the Threat to the West, Old and New Terrorism, Donald Trump's War on Terror, Britain's Long War. I also wanted to mention this because it's from the 90s, just to see, no, from the early 2000s, but still looking into the historical aspects of terrorism. So Britain's Long War, British strategy in the Northern Ireland conflict. A very complex, very accomplished personality, and we're very happy to have him here. Peter, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daniela, for organizing this wonderful conference. I'm very glad to be here. You can have, first of all, since many of you are psychologists, you can have a real-life case study of aging. This picture is 10 years old. This is how I look now. I'm glad you found it somewhere on the internet. So I'm going to talk to you not about the past. I'm going to talk to you, hopefully, a little bit about the future and where we believe violent extremism is going. And I think we are at a very interesting point in time, because it's one of those moments when things seem to be shifting. There's no shortage of potential for violent extremism in the future, because we live in turbulent times. We're coming out of a decade of multiple crises. We are going into more geopolitical and domestic instability. And we know, of course, that violent extremisms attach themselves to these cleavages and are reflecting divisions in our societies. So the three topics I want to talk about, and they kind of contain other topics, are the following. The first is I want to discuss a little bit about jihadism and what's going to happen next. Second, I want to talk about a topic that we've already touched upon, which is the idea of lone wolves and what that actually means in practice. And thirdly, I want to go into some of the new challenges that I believe are going to be important in the future. Let's start with the global jihadist threat, which has kept all of us busy for the last 10 years. Now, I'm not telling you any news by saying that the so-called caliphate that existed in Syria and Iraq has shrunk, if it hasn't ceased to exist. You can see pictures here, January 2015, the maximum extension of the so-called caliphate, covering an area the size of Great Britain, up to 10 million people. And already in March 2019, only a few villages were left. Of course, not everyone has disappeared, but the idea of the caliphate, that is no longer so attractive because it isn't there anymore, and it has failed to fulfill its central promise, the central promise that attracted so many people, which was that it was going to remain and expand. That was the slogan of ISIS, to remain and expand, and it hasn't expanded, and it hasn't even remained. So no longer is it an operational place where things can be planned, but it also, as an idea and a narrative, doesn't exist anymore. It has lost its global base, but also its attractiveness. And this has had numerous consequences. If you look, for example, this is a chart that was produced by my colleague, former colleague, Charlie Winter. If you look at 2015, ISIS had a central media office. It was producing so much propaganda on a day-to-day basis, had 32 different local media offices across the world. if you compare that to 2020, you can see that basically not much has been left of that global media infrastructure. In fact, you can't read it from here, but the only local media offices that were still churning out ISIS propaganda were not actually located in Syria and Iraq. They were located in places like Afghanistan, Yemen, etc. So the amount of ISIS propaganda has also been reduced dramatically. That doesn't necessarily mean that jihadism or Islamism has disappeared. There's also Al-Qaeda which is increasingly, in fact, defining itself via its regional affiliates. That's another important change. We used to have Al-Qaeda as a global terrorist network trying to attack the West. That's no longer true necessarily. Al-Qaeda still exists. Al-Qaeda still has local affiliates, but they are trying to avoid being associated with Al-Qaeda. They are trying to portray themselves as regional organizations, embedding themselves with other regional organizations in local conflicts, such as in Somalia, in Syria, in Nigeria, etc. For the time being, the strategy of Al-Qaeda is precisely not to attack the West, but to gain strength in the places where they are present. And that illustrates that Islamism has not gone away, even though the threat to the West has been greatly reduced. And one of the central places where jihadism is active right now is, of course, Africa. If you look across this map, in basically every part of Africa, in North Africa, and South Africa, and Mozambique, in East Africa and Somalia anyway, and in West Africa, you do have ongoing local conflicts of which jihadist groups are often part. Even in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, you now have ISIS activity. Again, this illustrates that Islamism has not gone away, but for the time being, perhaps it poses a much reduced threat to Western countries, including to Austria and other countries of the European Union. So let me turn now to the second big topic, which is related to the first. So what kind of threat do we still have in Europe? And the first point to make is that large networks, the kind of networks that carried out the attacks in Brussels or in Paris, 2015, 2016, other European capitals, these networks have become very rare. We just don't see them anymore, and to some extent, that's a success of security agencies in European countries by having dismantled these networks. It's become much, much more difficult to organize in such an extensive way. And this is borne out by the figures, and this is an interesting statistic I want to show you because it illustrates my point, which is that Islamism has not gone away, but it is a different kind of threat than it used to be. So if you look, for example, at 2015, and you see that's the dark blue figure, then in 2015 we had 17 Islamist attacks in Europe, causing 150 fatalities. So 17 attacks, killing 150 people. These are figures by Europol. In 2019, you had actually a greater number of attacks, 21 attacks, not just 17, 21 attacks, but only killing 10 people. And that shows you how the threat has changed within a small number of years. And what it also indicates is, of course, that in 2019, the majority of these attacks were carried out by lone attackers, lone actors, which are often described in the media as lone wolves. And what we know, of course, is that these lone attacker attacks typically, on average, cause fewer fatalities, only 0.5 fatalities per attack in 2019, whereas around 10 fatalities per attack in 2015. If you look at the details, you will see basically, for example, in 2020, every single attack, every single Islamist attack in Europe was carried out by a lone attacker. Now, the question, and the really interesting question from an academic point of view, is who are these so-called lone wolves? Is it actually correct to speak about lone wolves? It's certainly correct to speak about lone attackers or lone actors because they do carry out these attacks on their own. But that doesn't necessarily tell us anything about their radicalization. And I always make the point very strongly that there is a difference between being alone and being lonely. Being alone is a physical state. I'm alone, well, Daniela is here. I'm almost alone on the stage, but I'm not lonely because I'm surrounded by all of you and you're listening to me. So I don't feel lonely. Feeling lonely is a feeling, it's a subjective perception, whereas being alone is a description of a physical state. So I would say that whilst a lot of so-called lone wolves are alone in carrying out their attack, during the process of radicalization, they have not necessarily been lonely. And there are 3 examples here. I don't want to go into too much detail because I have a few more slides to go through. But Anders Breivik, 2011 in Oslo, he's perhaps the perfect example of an actual lone wolf. He radicalized entirely by himself. He didn't interact with a lot of people. Over a period of 3 years, he managed not to tell anyone anything about what he was planning to do. So I would consider him to be a lone wolf as we imagine it. But then in the middle, you have the attacker in Halle in 2019, Stefan Baljet, who attacked the synagogue in 2019. He also was a lone attacker. But what we have found out is, of course, that over a long period of time, over 18 months or even more, he interacted with other people in a transnational community of far-right extremists. He was by himself, but he perceived himself to be part of a global community. When he acted, he expected his friends, quote unquote, to give him applause for what he was doing. So he was perceiving that he had an audience for his attack and he was actively seeking applause to it. And I would say that psychologically and sociologically speaking, this is an entirely different process of radicalization. And then, of course, we had the attacker from November 2020 in Vienna that perhaps many of you are familiar with. I would say there was very little about this guy that was characterizing him as a lone wolf. Yes, he carried out the attack by himself, but he certainly radicalized in the context of existing jihadist milieus. He even got convicted, served a prison sentence, acquired his weapons through contacts, was in touch with other people. There were a lot of interactions, and he certainly, even though he carried out the attack by himself, had been radicalized in the context of social interactions. So 3 very different examples who in the media are all described as lone wolves, suggesting they are all the same. But I would say from a radicalization perspective, they are very different types of people. And I would hope that we can become a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more sophisticated in using terms like that. What we also know is, of course, that there is a strong link between terrorism and mental illness as a consequence of these lone attackers. And if you haven't seen it yet, I recommend the study by my colleagues in London, Paul Gill and Emily Kohner, who have perhaps the biggest database of lone attackers, and who found that the odds of a lone actor terrorist having a mental illness were 13.49 times higher than the odds of a group-based actor. And this is something that is very strong and has been repeatedly shown also in other studies. So this is something that is closely linked to the rise of lone actors, and this is something that has, of course, changed the way we look at prevention, but also at radicalization. So let me now come to the last part of my presentation, which is about new challenges. There are 5 of them, so just you know how to manage the different slides. The first one is the role and significance of returnees. As you all know, there are still people based in Syria and Iraq, most of them in so-called refugee camps. We have pretty good impression of how many individuals from different countries. Many people are now back, and I have to confess that 10 years ago, I expected many of these returnees to play a very significant role in the jihadist movement right now. We all believed that these so-called veterans of the struggle would be the leaders of the next generation. By and large, so far, this has not happened. Maybe it will never happen. It's a real mystery. In Britain, for example, it's very, very difficult to find out what has happened to the returnees. Very few of them have been prosecuted in court. Very few of them are in prisons. So what is happening to them? There's not a lot of information. I would be interested to understand much better what happens to these returnees, what happens also to people who are being brought back at a later point. So this is, to some extent, perhaps going to be a challenge. I would say we have to monitor it, but so far it has not turned out to be the big threat that everyone expected, including myself. And the second point is something that you're very familiar with, all of you, which is prisons and the so-called prison experience. There's a report that I published with a colleague of mine where we looked at extremist offender management in 10 European countries. It came out in 2020, and basically, again, the fact that we're talking about prisons and that we're discussing this topic is to some extent a consequence of the success of European security agencies in arresting so many people, getting them convicted, sometimes to significant sentences, sometimes to smaller sentences. The fact is many of them are going to be released now or in the coming years, and that's why it is important that this project has taken place and that we're looking at this. The third, and perhaps I would say one of the most significant problems and challenges going forwards, is the spread of so-called conspiracy theories. Again, I believe a consequence of the internet, social media, also the COVID pandemic, and everything that has happened over the past 3 years. I'm going to show you some, I believe, shocking numbers now. Shocking numbers that have just recently, last week, come out. It's a survey that was done by some of my colleagues at King's in London, Professor Bob Duffy, who has done a survey in Britain about belief in conspiracy theories. And whilst these figures are for Britain, I do believe probably they can be replicated across Western Europe. So that was the study. You can find it online. There's also a BBC documentary about it. So what it showed is that around a third of the British public say various conspiracy theories are probably or definitely true. So a third of the British public, for example, believes that the Great Replacement theory is true. A third of the public believe in all the COVID-related conspiracy theories. A third of the public believes in the so-called Great Reset. Stuff that we are talking about that we're seeing perhaps on Telegram channels is actually very, very widespread. And a second really interesting finding of that was that, of course, to some extent, not entirely surprising, a lot of the people who do believe in these conspiracy theories get their information from so-called alternative media. So The Light, for example, in Britain is a free newspaper. I mean, nowadays, no one reads newspapers anymore, right? But it is a very popular newspaper that is handed out on the streets in pedestrian zones, which is full of conspiracy stuff. In fact, amongst readers of The Light, 64%, not just a third, believe in these conspiracy theories. And here comes the most concerning bit, and the reason why I'm talking about this, because according to this study, and this is the important figure, 15%, between 13 and 15%, 1 in 7 members of the public believe that in certain circumstances, the use of violence is justified in defending these conspiracy theories or doing something about it. So 1 in 7 members of the public do agree that in the context of protests, for example, it would be justified to undertake acts of violence. So that's why I believe that talking about these conspiracy theories is not only something that is relevant in the context of being concerned about a cohesive society, about political discourse, it is also an issue for violent extremism. And I do believe, unfortunately, that over the next few years, we will see acts of violence being carried out in the name of some of these theories. The fourth challenge, and I'm soon coming to an end, is of course about far-right extremism. And what we've seen here in this particular area is what many people perhaps a little bit facetiously describe as pick and mix, something that we hadn't seen before, something that a lot of security agencies are struggling with because we had a very clear idea of what a far-right extremist looks like. If I say far-right extremist, what picture do you have in mind? You have in mind probably the picture of a bald guy, a skinhead, who looks very angry. But what we've seen over the past few years is that this is no longer necessarily true. There's no longer necessarily a unity of effort. People are attacking different types of targets, whether it's immigrants or Muslims or Jews. It almost doesn't matter anymore. In certain transnational contexts, all of these different ideas become united under a very wide umbrella. And I want to give you just one example to illustrate how difficult it was for security agencies to realize what's going on. This is actually, how many of you know this guy? Does anyone know him? There's a guy called, oh, you know him. One person in the entire audience knew him. This guy is called David Samboli. And he is, in fact, probably the single, the single most dangerous. He was the single most dangerous far-right terrorist in German post-war history. 18 years old, carried out an attack in Munich in July 2016. Many of you perhaps can remember that. He killed 9 people. That's why I'm saying there's National Socialist Underground killed 10 people, but it was more than one person. He was fascinated by lone shooters. All his victims were Sinti or had non-German ethnic backgrounds. He admired Anders Breivik. He, in fact, wrote a manifesto about foreign enslaved people and quote-unquote cockroaches. He excessively played shooting games, was part of a chat group named the Anti-Refugee Club on the gaming platform Steam. So if you look at all these bullet points, you would look at this and you would say, obviously, this is a far-right extremist. Yet, it took the Bavarian authorities 2 years to confirm that this was, in fact, a far-right extremist. If you look at the bullet points, you think, well, this is kind of obvious. This is an Anders Breivik type. This is like Christchurch. This is like Halle. This is like all these other attacks, Phoenix, Arizona. But there were 2 things that really threw them off. Number one, his parents were Iranian. He was himself the child of refugees who'd come to Germany in the 1990s. If he had turned up at a local neo-Nazi group in Germany, they would have almost certainly said, we don't want anything to do with you. You are not the idea of German we have. Yet, he became a German nationalist, right-wing extremist on social media platforms, radicalized by himself. The fact that he had Iranian parents really confused the German security agencies. They said, our idea, the kind of right-wing extremists that we are watching, they are not like that at all. And the second fact was, of course, that he had a long history of mental health problems. And this was what initially they settled on. They said this was a genuinely disturbed guy, and to some extent he was. Yet at the same time, he was also a radicalized far-right extremist who hated refugees while being a son of refugees himself. So what I'm saying is right-wing extremism has diversified like everything else. And it's no longer that easy to say this guy is a far-right extremism because of how he looks or how he acts. With the help, thankfully, well, sadly, of the internet, it's become a lot more complicated. And then, of course, we do have crossovers between different online subcultures. And perhaps the most prominent example, but not the only example, are so-called incels, misogynists online. Is this far-right extremism? To what extent can we describe someone who is violently misogynist automatically as a far-right extremist? What kind of ideological content does there have to be in order to qualify as a hate crime or as terrorism? What is the difference between these two anyway? And to what extent are these online subcultures overlapping? These are questions that I think a lot of security agencies and probably at some point also practitioners will be struggling with. As a fifth and final point, of course, there is going to be technological challenges that we have already seen emerging: terrorist use of drones, 3D printed guns, and perhaps even potentially artificial intelligence. This is not something I necessarily want to talk about today a lot. But just to conclude, global jihadism certainly is on the defensive, is not yet defeated, has become a lot less, certainly in Europe and Western countries, but it's also become a lot more confusing. Lone attackers are now the predominant mode of terrorist attackers across Europe, including the UK. Lone attackers not necessarily lonely. Many communicate their intentions, and this is a topic that I'm sure you have heard lots about, leakage, and there's an increasing link with mental illness. There are old and new challenges: returnees, prisons, far-right and anti-government extremism, conspiracy theories, and new technology. The known unknown, to some extent, that I haven't talked about, that you may have wanted to ask me about, is, of course, geopolitical game changers. At this point, I don't think we have seen a lot of radicalization that has been connected to the conflict in Ukraine, but this may still happen. And foreign influences is also a topic that a lot of people are very concerned about. So in many ways, the picture has become more confusing. We are at a confusing point in time where I think the tectonic plates are shifting. New things are emerging, and that's why I find it particularly interesting to be alive right now and follow these trends. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this fascinating input that we got here. I think there is a lot of food for thought. I really invite everyone to ask questions. I know you have them, also from online. On my side, I wanted to maybe... Oh yeah, actually we have already a question. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Peter, for your presentation, your brilliant presentation, as usual. And thanks, Daniela, for such an amazing event, a final conference, very useful, a lot of food for thought, indeed. So thanks a lot for everything. My question, Peter, relates with the gender perspective, because we have discussed a lot this morning on the gender approach in tools and in trainings programs. How about women in this new panorama, and not only regarding jihadism, because we also reflect about the role in jihadism in the context of the caliphate, but after the caliphate, what is the role or the shifting role of women in violent extremism and terrorism, not only in jihadism, but also in the far right, because we also seen changes in the evolution in the role of women involved in extremist groups related with the far right. So could you dig a little bit on this topic?
Sure.
And thanks a lot again.
Sure. I mean, I think with jihadists in particular, what we're seeing is, of course, that the people who are still in the refugee camps, it's a disproportionate number of women. They have produced children. Some of them remain very actively committed to the movement. And just like I said, I've been proven wrong about the returnees, so I don't want to make any firm predictions about female returnees. I do not know exactly what is going to happen. What I do know is, of course, that the longer these people stay in these camps, the more or the bigger the chances are that they are becoming ideologically hardened. So the people that are coming back now, think have a greater chance of returning to some form of activism in the future than people who returned in 2012 or 2013. And that's probably true for men and women. On the far right, I have to say I have probably 20 students who want to write dissertations about women in the far right, and I wonder if there are 20 female far-right terrorists to write about. I think it is, to be honest, a very rare phenomenon. In Germany, we had one leading member of the National Socialist Underground was a woman. But in fact, if you look at far-right organizations, there are females, but they are, like in the jihadist movement, typically connected to a man within that either husband or relationship or brother or something like that. So it would be interesting to study whether something has happened, but the reality is, of course, that both the jihadist movement and the far-right movement are essentially have one thing in common. They are both very misogynist ideological movements. So if there is a significant and active involvement of women, I would probably expect that more if we had a big return of far-left extremism or something like that. But I'm not an expert on that.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you, Peter, for your amazing overview, very useful. I just have a question about right wing, of course. If we look at what happened in Colosseum, in what happened in United States, we saw again a lot of interaction between different kind of movements, conspiracy, right wing, and so on. And we saw also the kind of relationship between the politics and this kind of movements. And we saw also in Europe quite a lot of interesting elections, interesting outcomes of elections going towards populism and the right side of the spectrum, let's say. Do you see any worrying signs between political populism and right wing for the coming future?
So this is a genuinely interesting question. I don't think, well, I certainly, I'm sorry to say again, I don't have the perfect answer to that, but it is one that is debated amongst scholars of these phenomena. There's one school of thought that says if you have strong right-wing populist parties, there's less reason for people to become violent extremists. And this would be an explanation, for example, why we have seen relatively little far-right terrorism in a place like France, where you have a very strong right-wing populist party. There's another school of thought that says the exact opposite is true. The more right-wing populism you have, the more extreme narratives become normalized, and the easier it is for people to take violent action. I have not seen the definitive conclusion on that debate. I think it would be very interesting, and I'm not standing here telling you that I know the answer. I guess, like always in academia, there's a number of conditions that people have to figure out under which one or the other is true. Of course, if you look at the United States of America, I do think it is potentially a very dangerous picture. And of course, we're all following the news about Donald Trump potentially being convicted of one thing or the other. And I wonder whether I should be happy or sad about this, because if he actually does go to prison, I do fear that there is a huge potential for this to turn into something very nasty, because there are tens of millions of people who are very supportive of him, and as we all know in the United States, there are more guns than people. So I do think there is a potential there for this to be hugely destabilizing.
Hello, good day.
Hi, good day.
It's working?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. First of all, thank you for this great presentation. It was very informative. And I would like to ask that what do you think? Is it a a new challenge or a serious challenge that the number of the school attacks higher and higher.
School attacks?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so...
The shootings, for example.
Sorry?
For example, the shootings in the last months or year.
Absolutely. No, and I think this is something that we have seen. So there is a sort of a bit of a crazy political debate about this, because what you have seen much more of in recent years is incidents where it is no longer that easy to determine whether an actor has been ideologically motivated. So we, for example, had a number of school shootings where it was later found out that the attacker, for example, had far-right literature on his laptop, was saying very extremist things, but at the same time, the victims in the school shootings did not necessarily correspond to that. So they were not necessarily an outcome of that ideology as you would typically imagine it. And also another factor in many of these cases was what I described before, long histories of mental illness, which are sometimes very difficult to judge. So I do think more and more moving forward, we will have these cases where it's no longer that easy to say, are we dealing with a terrorist? Is this a hate crime? Or is this a crazy person? You know? And it will sometimes, as in the case of an attacker 2 years ago in my home city in Würzburg in Germany, a jihadist, it will sometimes take months and several experts to determine whether someone was mentally so disturbed that he was not capable of understanding what he was doing. And this is really difficult because the media, of course, wants to know on the same day. They want to know on the same day, is this a terrorist or is this a quote-unquote crazy person? In what box do we put him? And it gets very easily politicized. I can see that on Twitter almost within minutes of an attack. Everyone has made their mind up. And if you're in one camp or the other, it depends on whether you like the attack or not. So this will become, if anything, I think it will become more difficult, and school shootings are a typical example because we've had a number of examples where we had school shootings where it turned out that the attacker had some extremist views.
Thank you for your presentation. On one of your slides you showed left-wing anarchists. So
left-wing anarchists?
Yes.
This, the Europol, yeah, Europol counts it like that.
Can you say what role they play in the whole story?
So, I think this is something that is certainly counted by Europol as a category, and without having studied this intensely, is certainly a topic in some European countries. So, for example, in Greece, you do have a very active, proactive, and sometimes violent left-wing anarchist scene. And I would suspect, without remembering exactly how these figures came about, that probably a lot of the attacks that are counted here are coming from Greece and from a small number of other European countries. We have certainly got, even in countries like Germany, you do have a left-wing anarchist scene which is highly concentrated in certain places. So in Germany, for example, in Berlin, in Leipzig, a number of places, and there will be acts of violence from time to time. I do not, on the whole, consider them to be as dangerous as right-wing or jihadists.
Yeah, just a question here. Needless to say, excellent presentation, Peter. We do know that in the past decade or 15 years, the majority of the programs and the policies that were in place were being very reactive instead of a preventive scope.
Yeah.
So we now know the emerging challenges in the upcoming years. How do you see that governments and policymakers are aware to be more preventive than reactive as they were in the past?
Absolutely. So this is the bane of my life. I mean, this is what I've been telling policymakers for 15 years now. But unfortunately, this is the way life is, right? So something happens, a lot of people die, then suddenly it becomes very easy to talk about prevention, to get funds, to get policymakers' attention. If nothing has happened, it's often, in most cases, much more difficult. And it's a vicious cycle, because especially when you're talking about prevention, prevention should happen before, not afterwards. If you go into a community with a prevention program just when something has happened, it's too late. You don't invest in fire prevention when the house is burning. You invest in fire prevention so the house doesn't burn in the first place. And this is, I mean, on a theoretical level, of course, every policymaker understands that. They are not stupid. But on a practical level, it becomes very difficult to make the case. And that's why it's so important for all of you now to go to your politicians at this point in time and to convince them to at least maintain the level of funding that they allocated to prevention efforts in 2015, 16, 17, 18, when everyone was concerned about ISIS. During that period, in almost every European country, prevention suddenly became an important issue, funds were allocated. And I can see some policymakers in a number of countries saying, maybe we spent too much on this, maybe we should reduce it. Actually, you shouldn't reduce it. You should maintain it so that, prevention is allowed to work. But you should also insist that the people working on prevention are adapting to the new challenges that present themselves. So rather than cutting funds, make them accept the challenge of something new. Because prevention practitioners can also be a little bit stuck in things, and they don't necessarily want to adopt new challenges. So it's both things. Keep the funding, but adapt.
All right. Well, I guess I will say thank you very much again. It was very inspiring. I think we all go home with a lot more thoughts than we came with at the beginning. Let's give Peter another round of applause for this really very insightful keynote. We basically set the mood on the topic of future challenges. So we're also looking ahead, not just in the past. And I would like to invite now our panelists on the stage, Annie Devos, Petra Pavlas, and Dorin Mureșan. Please join me here to talk about future challenges in the area of extremism and terrorism, with a particular emphasis in the area of, I'm going to sit down as well, in the area of prison and probation. Before we start, I would like to briefly introduce you guys, if you don't mind. So we have Annie Devos, who is the president of the Confederation of European Probation. She has a very long CV, very impressive. I took a part of it. She has been prison governor, technical expert on prison policy for the Ministry of Justice, head of department in charge of the individual inmates' files. She has run the probation department called Houses of Justice, which I think is very typical, and was also Director General for the Wallonia-Brussels Federation with 13 local houses of justice, so this is very typical for Belgium. And she was also involved in the organization called CAPREV, which is an NGO dealing with the de-radicalization reintegration in Belgium, and a lot more. So I invite you to also check out the website of the CEP. Much knowledge is there, also for our field of de-radicalization disengagement. Then it's my distinct pleasure to also introduce Petra Pavlas, who I must say was also very much involved in the initial stages of the EUTEx project, and thank you so much for your support through sometimes challenging times, including the EU portal. She is now also coordinator of the Foreign Nationals Expert Group at EUROPRIS. EUROPRIS is the European Organization of Prison and Correctional Services. And the reason why we have Petra here is because, of course, more or less, in Austria, for example, more of our inmates in this area of terrorism, jihadi terrorism, are in fact foreign nationals. Petra Pavlas is based in Vienna. She started to work at the Vienna Josefstadt prison, so trainees who were there, yes, Josefstadt prison. Then she took up the FNP, so the Foreign National Prisoners Affairs Unit, located in the Director General of the Prison Service of the Federal Ministry of Justice of Austria. So you were here, you have done a lot of things. She is consulting there, and she's an interface between various departments within the Ministry of Justice and all Austrian prisons concerning foreign national prisoner affairs, and a wide range of other international organizations and public authorities. So again, a very experienced panelist here with us. Now we have also Dorin Mureșan, who has 13 years of professional experience, 27 years of experience in corrections, and including 18 years as a project management, career and corrections expert and trainer, 15 years of senior management. He is a member of the International Corrections and Prison Association, ICPA, since 2006. From 2012 until 2020, he was a board member. And since 2022, he has been the chair of Staff Training and Development Network after serving the 8 previous years as co-chair. So we have here very prominent speakers from the area, from specific areas of prison probation. And we asked them to prepare short statements on a particular question, which is, what future challenges in the area of extremism and terrorism do you think are going to be relevant for prison or probation, and how? So I would like to give you now the floor for brief statements, and then we open for discussion. Please, Annie, if you want to start. Is it on? I'm not sure. Yeah, I think it should be on now.
It's like a mental pressure to work with this. So thank you for the invitation. I am glad to be here, and thank you for all the brilliant speakers we had before. They said a lot of things, so I don't want to repeat things. And I would like to focus on some very practical issue that we meet in the frame of probation. So we work a lot about the cooperation between agencies, the transition management. We need to put a lot of effort to have a good relation between all the people working in the penal chain. But we see also, as Ioan Durnescu mentioned, the hard measures and the soft measures. In the probation, we are with the soft measures, but we have also to cope with the hard measures. And one of the hard measures is the deprivation of citizenship. You have this possibility that the court may use this possibility to deprive the person of his own identity, citizenship. And if you go back in the society without any citizenship, it's very difficult to go back in the society. It means that you rely on your family, on your relatives, and it's really difficult because you have a lot of tensions in the families and also in the environment of where the people are living. But it's also a problem for the officials to follow all those people who are put in the clandestinity. Really, it's one of the big problems we meet at the moment. Another one is we have the hard measure public sector, but we have also the hard measure coming from the private sector. And from the private sector, it's from the banks. The banks have the possibility to impede you to have a bank account. It's very difficult when you are with a certain, when you are known in the press. Your name is somewhere in 2015 linked to some attack or some contact with suspects. It's too much, and it's no more possible for you to have a bank account. So how do you live today in our society without any bank account? How do you live in our society today without any citizenship? It's impossible. It's impossible to go to have a work, a normal work, to follow a training, to get access to a lot of possibilities. And a third problem to me is also, we had a lot of crisis, as said by Mr. Neumann. We know that in prison and probation we have a lot of people with health problems, mental health issues, and to get access to these facilities is very difficult, and more for people we follow. So I see there big difficulties. There is also hope. In Belgium, we brought back women and children from the refugees camp. We follow also those people, and really it's going well. For the children, it's really going well because they are surrounded. Families are there. There are a lot of difficulties, but the support is really high, and it's very important. But I would like to make one point. The men are still there. It's impossible to bring them back because we don't have the social support with the press, politicians, to bring the men back, but it's very important also to bring them back. And it's very important with the children and the family to speak about the reality that they knew in the camps, but also what did the fathers, the mothers, to speak about and to put words on those realities. And a last thing, we have more and more experiences with restorative justice in Belgium, and we work with families of offenders, attackers, in the trial now in Brussels. I saw the picture you showed, and also families of victims. And we have restorative circles with those people together, and it's absolutely amazing, because it's not them and us. It's really, we have a common problem. The reality is the reality, but we are mothers. We have the same problem with my son attacker, or my daughter or my son victim. And this dialogue is crucial to build up in our societies. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Of course, as a president of CEP, you have this bird's eye view over probation on the entire continent. So these are really very useful, very valuable insights. I will come back to some of them, but before I want to give the floor to Petra on this particular topic of foreign nationals. There are many challenges, clearly also to do with citizenship, but many others.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And as you already mentioned, I was involved in the EUTEx project in a very early stage. And for me, it's really good to see how that evolved and developed. Also that it's kind of loop between the practitioners and you as researchers, and also for the experts. It's really, really good to see how you're feeding back and now started to be some kind of community. It's really good to see how it developed. And yes, as you mentioned as well, we do have sometimes kind of issues and problems when it comes to one of the main objectives and aims of the prison services. It's the release time. Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's conditional release or the end of the sentence. When it comes to release, we have to have a look on where is the person going to. Is he staying in our community? Is he going to a foreign country? Is he allowed to stay here? Is there any entry ban? Also, if there is an entry ban, and now I'm coming to a really big gap, if there is an entry ban in that country, he's serving the sentence, what do we do with the persons who cannot be deported? With the so-called tolerated refugees, what do we do with those persons? And I think there's still a gap. I mean, there is actually, at the moment, there is a very good project, I would not call it project, but they evolved it in, I think, 2 years ago at the HMPPS in the UK. There is a hub for people who are not allowed to or cannot be deported. And they do have an entry ban or residence ban. And I think that's really a brilliant thing to have, to close that gap. Maybe later on I can talk about it if there are any questions or something like that. But yeah, that's our main issues, I would say, and challenges. To have a look at those people. Where will they go and when? And sometimes it's very short term. When you get informed, or the prison services get informed if they can go back to their home country, if they stay in their country where they served the sentence, if they do have entry ban or a residence ban. So yeah, that's still, I think, a real challenge. But yeah, future work should focus more on multi-agency, multi-professional, and I think that will be the future, yeah, to be connected and have it like you here in a loop and then feedbacking to each other. And yeah.
And of course, this situation has an effect on reintegration efforts as well and rehabilitation efforts. So if the person does not have much perspective of he or she doesn't know if this perspective is there or not, then that affects, of course, the motivation of the person, maybe also of the practitioners to work with this person.
Definitely, and also if you take a look on what is also important, and thanks to Peter Neumann to mention that, what will be after release, but not only, but also looking back, where is the person coming from? What is his or her background? Also when it comes to his cultural background. It has not to be that one has to be a foreign national. It only, I mean, sometimes if he also has the nationality of the prison, the sentence he served, it can be that he has migration background, to have a look where his parents are coming from, what is the social binding, how much is he integrated in our society. I think that should be, there should be much more focus on that. Yeah. Also on a psychotherapeutic, from a psychotherapeutic point of view, more focus on that as well, maybe. Or something to initiate like a cultural mediator within the prisons. I don't know, just a few ideas from my side, but yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting sometimes how little emphasis is put, for example, on this aspect of intercultural competence, right? Also in institutions, so really understanding what the person is coming from, and it can also come to misunderstanding how the person reacts just because one is not familiar with that particular culture, right?
Maybe I can just give a small example from practice. We had a female inmate from Nigeria, and I was talking to a prison officer, and she mentioned that this woman from Nigeria, she never ever looked into her eyes when she was talking to her. And the prison officer said, it's so disrespectful when I'm talking to her that she's not looking at me. And then I was talking to the Nigerian inmate and was asking her, or I tried to explain the situation, and then she mentioned, or she explained to me that in her home country, it is not allowed to have, if it's a higher level or an authority, to look directly into the eyes. Then I reported back to the prison officer, and the problem was solved. I mean, this was just a small example for it, but I think we need more things like that to develop, and also to have a focus on that and to be aware of that.
Yeah. And maybe just one little thing, because we are kind of here, but then we were going to continue with the usual program. What you mentioned also is this experience from before. So, for example, I remember when we did a small study on the prison population here with the terrorist convictions, that really a big majority of them came from conflict zones, so with trauma of different kinds of conflicts, not Syria, other kinds of conflict, which were probably not really treated or not really put emphasis on. So this mental aspect that is sometimes underdeveloped in care.
Yeah. So I think that therapeutic work is really, really, really of utmost importance, also to have focus on that,
All right. Okay, well, but we also want to take a more international perspective. So from the perspective of this is, I understand, the kind of an international EUROPRIS, right? International EUROPRIS and CEP, or?
International Correction and Prison Association, it's a worldwide organization. We have also European ICPA, so similar with our colleagues from EUROPRIS, and we cooperate in various projects. Thank you for the invitation here, and I was a part, and it's glad to see that, well, we are making progress, and I have to congratulate you and EUTEx project, because it was for the first time since 2014 when the first radicalization, de-radicalization, disengagement project started, when I see your presence last year I think we were in Slovenia, where we share opinion, you share your vision, you share the activities of the EUTEx project to another. It was the HOPE project, where we were with my colleagues and friend Pedro, because what we saw on European market, because it's like a market, it's people are working underground and we are not sharing this information with you, and in some of the cases we are overlapping, But it was for the first time when I see a cooperation and sharing the information, you from EUTEx connecting with the network that was created at the whole project. And I think this is a great step forward, because if we look back from 2014 when the first project started, we see that everybody is working as an island and not interconnected. And a lot of information and a lot of money were spent in a not very clever manner. Now I get back to the issue of the prison. In theory, we used to say that prison has two purposes. First, to keep the inmates in custody and to protect the society by keeping them in custody. And second is to prepare them for the social reinsertion, reintegration in the society. This is in theory. In practice, what we saw that in the newspapers and the scholars are saying prisons are a breeding ground for radicalized inmates. And it's a reality, because if you look at the terrorist case in Vienna, if you look at the brothers from France that commit the terrorist attacks at Charlie Hebdo, or if you look at the brothers from Belgium who commit the terrorist attacks in Brussels, we see that they have something as a background. They serve the sentence in prison. Some of them were captured at the border between Turkey and Syria. They come inside in prisons, and what we saw that basically something happens with the prison environment. In a prison environment, it's about the power, who control the environment. So when we notice that some prison administrations in Europe decrease the level of supervision, of interaction between staff and inmates during the night shift, decrease not just the level of supervision, decrease the level of authority of the shift manager. That's, if you are a shift manager in some prisons in Europe, you are not empowered to open a cell when a suicide crisis happens. You need to have the agreement from the governor, who is 50 kilometers away. So this is an intelligence information for a recruiter that recruit radicalized inmates or targets in a prison, that, okay, now I own the environment. I control this. I am controlling the prison cell, because they are not capable to open the cell, because they need to take approval from the prison governor. And this is a reality, and I find this information working in another project when I have colleagues from Belgium, from Germany, from Portugal, from Romania, and we have to create scenarios, and you see there were 4 ways of dealing with a similar case, a suicidal case. There were 4 ways to deal this. It says, well, in our case, we are not capable to open the prison cell unless the governor gives the permission. So this is why prisons became a recruitment ground, a radicalization environment, because in a way or in another, in some of the prisons, inmates are taking control of these environments. Why is that? Because we decrease the level of supervision, because we want to be financially efficient. Prison is not a business to be run in an efficient manner. When you decrease the cost, you will pay for this decision, not on the short term, but on a medium and on the long term. You mentioned about the issue of that person from Nigeria who, in her culture, you're not having eye contact with that person. If we ask somebody from Europe, you see that we have 28 member states at the European Union, and we have 28 different ways of training our prison staff, starting from 6 months and ending with 2 years. On a medium way, we empower a person to supervise and to take decision about the life of a person that we have in custody with limited knowledge. You know, there are jurisdictions in Europe that they are thinking about decreasing the scholar qualification to prison officers to 10 classes, just because it's not, these are the realities. So in this type of scenario, imagine that you have a recruiter who is very open-minded, who is very skillful. He will be like a wolf in a sheep herd. He will act. There is no control on him. So I think one of the steps forward is at the European level to work hard, basically to create a common platform related to the education. Issues like you mentioned as intercultural education to act as it's a must to have it in the training curricula, because when you don't understand something, you try to judge. So when you don't understand the culture, the beliefs, the practice of a person that you supervise, it's very easy to call them cockroach. It's also very easy to call them white sheep and so on. As we see from these are also available for the staff that work in prisons, Because when you send prison staff with limited knowledge to supervise a prison population, which is, as you say, in this type of context, is from my point of view, is like a crime. Yeah? So when we discuss about when we discuss about the prison as a breeding ground for radicalization, I recommend to all of you to take a look on there is a movie on HBO or Netflix. It's called The Ghost of Abu Ghraib. And it's what happens in Abu Ghraib. But there is a message from a person who worked as a soldier who was sent, starting from now on, you are not a military police company. From now on, you are prison administrators. And basically, they receive a 2-week trainings, and they were in charge to supervise the 4,000 inmates in Abu Ghraib, 300 people. Well, I said, we don't know what to do. And basically, they used the old way of doing work in prison, an old way that I see with my own eyes 30 years ago when I entered in a Romanian prison. There is no big difference. But these things happened when you send to work in a very sensitive environment, people with limited qualification. And I think this is what we should do. We should address what we develop in this project to the frontline correctional officer, because the radicalization process happened in any prison environment where we have, not in the offices of the prison governors. It happens on the wings where we have staff training, where we have frontline correctional officers. They need to be empowered with these knowledges. They need to recognize the signs. Congratulations for the risk assessment tool that we developed. If I have the possibility to intervene, I will give you some tips how we could promote this tool. So.
Well, yes, we're definitely very thankful for these tips. Team over there as well. So we will definitely get back to you on this. And also thank you for the very concrete suggestions that you made concerning the follow-up of the project, because this is also something that we're looking for in this conference, how to continue this effort. I also wanted to again emphasize 2 important things that you said. First of all, don't forget about the prisons, right? I mean, one sometimes have this kind of very short attention span. Person is arrested, out of sight, out of mind, yeah? And basically do not save on the prison. Like if you want to save money, save somewhere else, but maybe not on the prison, not on the probation, because these are really important areas, important institutions that are preventive. As well. They're not just punitive, but also preventive in terms of preventing future violence. And also another point, the importance of training, the importance of training the staff in various aspects, and really tailored, targeted, specialized training. If there's any questions, please, I encourage you to raise your hand. In the meantime, I will continue the conversation also with Annie. I was very much intrigued by this aspect of restorative justice, and I was wondering how difficult or how easy is it to convince people to take part in these kinds of processes, in particular victims, I can imagine.
Yes, it's not an easy process, and I think it's the responsibility of the public services to give the possibility to give finance to NGO to offer this possibility. So around the process of the attacks in Brussels, we started a group with, in Belgium, and in the probation, we follow also the victims. So at the moment, I have 12 probation officers working in the trial with all the victims. So it was a manner to feel the needs, because you need really to grasp the needs of victims, but also from the offenders and around the offenders of their families. And we started after a work done in France after the attacks in Paris and Nice. There was also a group there of restorative justice, and they disseminate. We took contact with them, and we initiate something in Belgium, and now we have this kind of group of parole, but it's a practice that we have in our country since more than 40 years. Also, after an attack, it's always the same. You have this pressure after a big drama. So it's something we are doing, but you need to work at a very, very little scale with 10, 12, 16, 8 people. So, but it's very important because it's like circles in the water. When you when you have somebody in your family with a difficult history, an offender doing so awful things, it's not only the offender. You have the relatives, the family, and they also need to cope with this new reality. So if you have the possibility to connect with those people and to build with them a sort of, they have to cope with their own history, their family. So it's also a possibility to put them in contact with people making the other experience as victim and also family of victims. And really, it seems to be not normal, but it works because people need to understand what happened. How is it coming to this reality? So we don't work with 10,000s of persons, but we work with hundreds of persons in this kind of structures. And I think it's very important to give chance to this kind of practices because it gives hope and people can really meet as victim, as offender, but you need really to give guarantee to a frame. The way you manage the mediation, the way you manage the communication, the process is key. But it's possible, and the result is really long-term result. It's not behind bars. Woo! No, really, you have a real answer because it's your own history and you learn to live with this part of your life. It's not a choice, but it came to you as victim and it's there. What do you do with that? Is this a trauma for the end of your life, or do you try to do something with that? And it's also to be actor of your own life. It's very important.
Right. Another thing I wanted to ask you about is, because we haven't talked so much about this issue, I think so far, the aspect of children. So, I mean, there are perhaps two approaches. One that says, well, you don't have to do much because children are, first of all, not so much indoctrinated, or it's easy to take them out of the whole environment, to just normalize their life, have them go to school and just live normally. Others say, no, they might be indoctrinated, we have to also de-radicalize them. What is your take on this?
Really depend of the age.
Right.
It depends also if the mother has a protective role in the camps. It's very important to see each time you need to go back to the person. It's not possible to generalize and to say it's always this way, this way, this way. It's not possible. So you need really to go in the contact to see also who is in the family, who are the grandparents able to take care. You need really to work on a very, very individual base. And according to the age, you have a lot of differences. But what we see in Belgium with the children coming back from the camps, they are really going well at school level, activities, also in their own development. So I think it was a very important decision of our government, but also pushed in the back by the federal prosecutor and also some NGOs to say we need to do something. Those children are Belgian children. It's our responsibility. They are citizens of our country. If we let them there, it will be a nightmare for everybody. So we need to do something, and it's really a public responsibility of the country. You don't let your citizen there. But we are not done with the men. With the men, we are not there. But we are on the track to do that. And I am not naive. So I was also a prison director. I know how it works with security measures. But I think it's really the responsibility as public authorities to cope with this kind of situation. It's if you want to have justice in a country, you need social justice, and you need to have a social approach of all those components. I think it's really important to do so. And for the CEP at the level of the other countries, we gather more than 40 countries of the Council of Europe, so we share a lot of experiences according to that, and I think that it's relevant to have this possibility to share about all the common challenges that we have. Thank you.
And also to mention that probably in each European country there is still the case that there are still children in the North Syrian camps who have still not been returned, and of course their mothers. So that's still an issue out there. Numbers differ, of course, depending on the country, but it's still an issue. All right, so as we are slowly running out of time, I would just like to ask you for a very brief statement of 1 or 2 sentences, but very challenging, building on what Peter has said, and also you kind of started it as well, Annie. How do you convince policymakers of things, of what needs to be done in prison probation? What do you have any tips on this? Maybe starting with Dorin and then this other way.
Yeah. So if I will be in the front of a politician and decision makers, obviously it's not popular to allocate money to probations, to prison, to law enforcement organization, because prison, probation, law enforcement organization don't bring votes. Yeah, it's a reality. If you have 1 million euros and you want to allocate it to a school, to a prison, or to a hospital, if you are a politician, for sure you will not allocate it to the prison. But if you want to say that, okay, if you say that investing in prison is expensive, or investing in developing the knowledge of those who work in prison or in probation environment is expensive, let's evaluate the cost of ignorance. And the cost of ignorance are 2 times, 3 times, 4 times higher than the cost of investment. So as a tip, so for example, in the last days we discussed with Pedro about the new risk assessment tool that you developed this. And knowing the other risk assessment tools, from my point of view, it's a very good one. It's an improved version that integrate good things, and from my point, respond also to some failures of the previous risk assessment tool, because in your country, you have an example of that guy who committed the terrorist attacks in December. Basically, he passed through a risk assessment tool. And looking at that 3 layers with red, yellow, and green, I was just knowing basic information about that person. I could see that he will fit very well in at least 2 or 3 characteristics from the red alert. So let's imagine an exercise that you go to a key decision makers, and I said, look, sir, this is the evaluation. We have this tool, this risk assessment tool on this project, and this guy from Austria, this guy from France, these guys from Belgium, look how they appear if we use this advanced tool to them. So let's imagine that right now in our prisons we are using the old style of risk assessment tools, and we are having people like the one in Austria that escaped from this. He succeeded to fail us. So do you want to allocate in this case, knowing that even right now in one prison in Europe, we apply this, from my point of view, obsolete tool, and we have people who, in a way, fool us, and right now we have a lone wolf who is preparing the next attack. What you will do, politician? I think this will be the tips. So we have a lot of database of persons that got radicalized in prison and escape and fool us when we use our risk assessment tool. Let's introduce them in this matrix and to see how they will fit in this new instrument. I think it will create awareness from my point of view.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point. They have to make it practical and to actually present the evidence. Thank you very much for this. Petra?
Yeah, I mean, that is really a difficult question to keep it short and simple, because it always has a lot of layers if it comes to that topic. But what firstly came to my mind was that it turned out that one of the most effective intervention is a safe and secure prison and prison environment and also prison system. And I think we can, if we work there and prevent, I don't know if it's about prevention work, we should also have a look on the prisons, like you mentioned, the focus be more on the prisons. And I think it's not only about the offenders, but also about society and the responsibility that the prisons do have for society or the prison system. And I think that would be a good argument to have that on society, to have a safe society. If we have safe and secure prison, we also will, if the offenders will be released, have safe society.
Yeah, very true. Annie, as somebody who has also been in the government, what works with policymakers?
It's always difficult because you have a lot of components, but I think that we need really to support social inclusion and to give tools to professionals to help people to go back to the society. Because it's more and more complex, difficult, polarized. It's important to have tools to really connect with the society. So possibilities to go back as citizens in the society. It's basic, but it's like this. And humility, I think it's very important to say to politicians, it's impossible to make your super numbers of votes about security. You think that you have something, but you don't have something. You create a new problem if you do. So don't take security as the big item of your campaign. It's not necessary.
Oh yeah, this is really, it's like an amazing quote. We should definitely save this one. Thank you very much, Annie. Very current topic, a very current quote as well. With this, we don't want to keep you too much longer because we have lunch waiting and it's been a very intensive day. I want to first of all thank you, our panel, for these amazing insights that you have delivered us today. Big round of applause. And I will take this side here again because I want to make some final round of thanks. I want to, first of all, thank Florian Engel and Alexander Seiser from the Coordination Unit for Extremist Prevention and Radicalization for hosting us here for this amazing location and logistics and everything, and also for your support during the whole project. Also, Spiros Papadopoulos from Neustadt for your engagement and enthusiasm and your knowledge. You contribute in so many ways to the course, so thank you again as well to you. I want to thank Stefan Weingast from Senor for being the brain and the organizer and the reliable one during this whole event. I think everything worked well and we're very grateful to you. And finally, last but not least, I want to thank Maria and Annika. Where is Annika? There's Annika, there's Maria, there's Daniela Hertel, and there's Petra Podesa. These are the invisible but absolutely necessary OIP working bees, without whom none of this would have been possible either. So thank you very much, you guys, as well. And on this note, there is lunch waiting, so please enjoy, network, mingle, and hope to see you all soon. And enjoy Vienna if you have the time. Thank you.